Tonight, we are going back almost 1100 years to four people who built a castle and then carried its deepest secrets down into the ground with them. It is a long story, and some of it is dark, but I will keep my voice low and even the whole way through, so you can let go of the day and drift off whenever you are ready. You do not need to follow every name. Let them pass over you like weather. If you wake at 3 in the morning and find my voice still going, that is fine too. Close your eyes again. We will still be here, somewhere in the Highlands, 1,000 years ago. Before the story takes hold, one small thing. If you have been falling asleep with us night after night, leave a comment and tell us the number. How many nights in a row has it been now? And if tonight is the first time you have found us, you only need to write 2 words. Night 1. It costs nothing, and it is a quiet way for all of us, scattered across the dark in 100 different countries, to know that we are not the only ones still awake. There, now you can settle back into your pillow. The school is called Hogwarts. You may know it already, with its shifting staircases, and its enchanted ceiling, and its 4 long tables set beneath floating candles. Every child who passes through its doors is sorted into one of 4 houses, and each house carries a name, a colour, and a set of values that have not moved in 1,000 years. Gryffindor, in scarlet and gold; Hufflepuff, in yellow and black; Ravenclaw, in blue and bronze; Slytherin, in green and silver. Those 4 names belong to people, real people, inside the world of this story, who lived and argued and loved and died long before any of the famous events you might half remember. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, Salazar Slytherin, 4 of the most gifted witches and wizards of their age, who found one another in a world that wanted them dead and chose to build something that would outlast every one of them. It did outlast them, by more than 1,000 years. But the 4 of them did not end well. Their friendship broke, first slowly and then all at once. And when they died, they left more questions behind than answers. Where each of them lies buried, no living person knows. What exactly passed between them in their last years together, no record fully tells. And each of the 4 carried at least one secret that went with them into the dark. Secrets hidden so carefully that some stayed buried for 1,000 years, and 1 or 2 have never been found at all. Tonight we are going to walk through the whole of it, slowly. The world they were born into, the castle they raised out of bare rock beside a black loch, who each of them truly was, underneath the colours and the crests, and the things they hid, from the world, from history, and in the end from each other. To understand why 4 people would pour their entire lives into a hidden school, you first have to stand in the world they were standing in. It was not a kind one. Picture Britain a little after the year 900. There were no clean lines yet between the magical and the ordinary, no laws keeping the 2 apart, no secret ministries or quiet enchantments to keep one world hidden from the other. Witches and wizards lived among everyone else, in the same muddy villages, behind the same wattle walls, and most of the time they lived in fear. Ordinary people did not understand magic, and what people do not understand, they tend to dread, and dread has a way of turning into something with torches and rope. A child who made a wooden cup drift up off the table, or set a hedgerow burning without ever touching it, could bring a crowd to the family door by nightfall. Magical parents lived with a low, constant fear of the day their son or daughter's gift would show itself in front of the wrong neighbour. They taught their children early to swallow it down, to hide the sparks, to never let the strange thing out where it could be seen. Some families managed, many did not. And there were children who had no one at all, a boy or girl born with magic to a family that had none, no grandmother who understood, no parent who could explain the burning in their hands. Those children frightened the people who were supposed to love them. Some were turned out of their homes, some were handed over. The lucky ones ran before anyone could decide what to do with them, and lived rough, half feral, teaching themselves through accident and pain. There was no school, none. Magic passed from one set of hands to the next, parent to child, master to apprentice, if you were fortunate enough to find a master. A village might have its hedge witch or its cunning man, someone who could set a bone or sour a rival's milk, and a child showing early promise might be taken in and shown a little. But most who were born with the gift learned by stumbling into it, and a great deal of knowledge lived only inside a few skulls, and died the moment those skulls went cold. Wands, where they existed at all, were crude and rare. Whole branches of magic were known only as rumor. It was a frightened, scattered, wasteful age, and gifted children paid the price for it with their lives. Into that age came four people who were each, on their own, the kind of person stories form around. Godric Gryffindor came out of the wild country in the west, the open moorland where the wind never stops and the gorse grows yellow over the hills. He was a fighter by temperament, broad and loud, and brave to the edge of foolishness, with a sword he carried like an extension of his own arm, and a hatred of cruelty that ran straight down to the bone. Where he saw a magical child being hunted, he went and stood between the child and the mob, and people who saw him do it did not forget it. Helga Hufflepuff came from a broad green valley, soft country with rivers in it, and she was made differently from Godric, though no less strong. She had the kind of patience that wears down stone. She believed, plainly and without much fuss about it, that every child who showed a spark deserved to be taught, the clever and the slow alike, the gentle and the difficult, the ones nobody else would take. Where Godric ran toward danger, Helga sat down beside the frightened and stayed until they were calm. Rowena Ravenclaw came down from a narrow glen in the north, and she was, by every account that survives, the sharpest mind of the four, and possibly of the entire age. She thought in patterns other people could not see. She could look at a problem from a dozen angles at once, and find the door in it that no one else had noticed. Magic, to her, was a thing to be studied and mapped, and pushed further than anyone had yet dared to push it, and a good deal of what would later make Hogwarts strange and wonderful came first out of her head. And Salazar Slytherin came up out of the low fen country in the east, the marshland of black water and reeds and mist that hangs over the ground at dawn. He was subtle where Godric was blunt, secretive where Helga was open, and he had a gift that even the other three did not share. He could speak to serpents. He was ambitious in a way that the age had no use for and could not contain, and he had survived the dangers of being a magical child by being cleverer and quieter and more careful than anyone hunting him, and that survival had left marks on him that never faded. How exactly the four of them came together, the records do not agree on. Some say Godric and Salazar met first, two young men of fearsome talent who recognized something of themselves in each other and became, for a time, the closest of friends. Some say it was Rowena's reputation that drew them, that wizards spoke of her brilliance, in low voices, across half of Britain, and the others came to find her. What is agreed is that the four met, and that when they met, an idea formed between them that none of them could have carried alone. The idea was simple to say, and almost impossible to do. They would build a hidden place, somewhere remote and defensible, where magical children could be brought in from across the land and kept safe behind walls no mob could storm. And inside those walls, the children would not just be hidden, they would be taught. Everything the four of them knew, and everything they could still learn, gathered into one place and handed down properly at last, instead of dying in scattered heads. A castle that was also a refuge, that was also a school, the first of its kind anywhere in their world. They went looking for the spot, and they found it in the far north of Scotland, in country wild enough that no ordinary traveller would ever stumble across it by chance. A high stretch of land above a long dark loch, with mountains at its back and forest crowding close, and weather that could turn from still to savage in the space of an afternoon. It was lonely and hard to reach and easy to hide, and that was exactly what they wanted. What they did next is the part that ordinary history could never quite swallow. They built a castle there, the four of them, and they built it with magic. No one fully knows how it was done, and the four of them never wrote the method down, which is itself the first of the many things they kept to themselves. What is certain is that the castle did not rise the way ordinary castles rose, with quarries and oxen and 10 years of broken-backed labour. It came up out of the rock, at the will of four extraordinary people, stone settling onto stone, towers climbing into the grey northern sky, and into its making, the four of them poured not just power, but intention. They were not building a fortress to keep people out, though it could do that. They were building a home for frightened children, and somehow that purpose soaked into the walls and stayed there, so that even 1,000 years on the place would feel, to a cold and homesick 11-year-old arriving for the first time, like somewhere they were meant to be. They shaped it to fit the four of them, and you can still read their four natures in the building if you know where to look. Much of what makes the castle feel alive came from Rowena, the staircases that swing from one landing to another when your back is turned. The doors that are only doors on alternate Tuesdays and the rest of the week are solid wall. The way the building seems larger on the inside than any honest survey of the outside could allow, with passages that double back and rooms that appear when they are needed and vanish when they are not. She designed a great deal of it as a kind of puzzle, a castle that rewarded a quick and curious mind and gently confounded a lazy one, and she meant that as a lesson in itself. The place was supposed to make you think. Helga's hand is felt lower down and warmer. She took charge of the kitchens, which sit deep in the body of the castle and have never once gone cold in 1,000 years, and she filled the school with the ordinary comforts that a child far from home actually needs. Food that appears in plenty, quiet rounded rooms full of soft chairs and growing plants, the sense, hard to name but easy to feel, that someone in this enormous stone building is looking after you. Where Rowena built to challenge, Helga built to soothe, and a school for terrified runaways needed both in equal measure. Godric saw to the castle's defences, and they were formidable. He layered the walls with protections meant to turn away anyone who came with harm in mind, enchantments that ran deep into the foundations and have held against every assault the long centuries threw at them. If Rowena made the castle clever, and Helga made it kind, Godric made it safe, and safety, in their age, was the whole reason for building it at all. And Salazar built downward. While the others raised towers toward the light, he took the deep places, the dungeons beneath the castle, and the cold passages that run below the loch, where the water presses green against the windows, and the light comes down filtered and strange. He was drawn to what was hidden, to the parts of the castle no casual visitor would ever see, and he made the lower reaches his own. At the time the others thought little of it. He had always preferred shadow to sun. They did not yet understand how much a man can build in the dark while his friends are busy up in the light, and by the time they understood, it was far too late. When the castle was finished, they began to bring in the children. They went out into the country, all four of them, and they found the magical young who were in danger, and they carried them back to the castle, and word spread, quietly, along the hidden channels that connected the magical families of Britain. Send your children north. There is a place now. They will be safe there, and they will be taught. For parents who had spent every day in fear of the mob, it was the answer to a prayer they had not dared to say aloud. The first students came in ones and twos, frightened and watchful, and then in greater numbers, until the empty castle filled with young voices, and the four founders found themselves no longer just builders but teachers, the first true teachers of magic their world had ever properly known. Getting the children to the castle at all was its own quiet act of courage, and it is worth lingering on, because it is easy to forget how dangerous the gathering itself must have been. The castle was safe once you reached it, but reaching it meant crossing a hostile country, and the four founders, or those they trusted, had to go out into that country again and again to find the children and bring them in. A magical child in a far-off village was not simply collected like a parcel. Word had to reach the right people without reaching the wrong ones. A route had to be found through land, where the discovery of what these travelers were carrying could have meant a mob and a fire for everyone involved. The hidden ways the magical families of Britain used to pass messages, and people had to be trusted. And trust, in that age, could get you killed. Every child who arrived at the great doors had been carried there, across real danger, by people who risked themselves to do it, and the warmth of the castle was earned, every time, by a cold and frightening passage through the world outside. Think of a single child making that passage, a girl, perhaps, from somewhere far to the south, who had spent her short life hiding what she could do, handed quietly one night to a stranger, who promised her frightened parents that there was a place now, in the north, where she would be safe. The long road, the watchfulness, the strangeness of being taken from everything she knew toward a thing she could not picture. And then, At the end of it, the land opening out, the mountains rising, the dark loch, and above it the castle, lit and waiting, larger than anything she had ever seen, with one of the four founders themselves standing at the doors to welcome her in, out of the cold. Multiply that by every child who ever came in those early years, each one a small, dangerous miracle of a journey safely ended, and you begin to feel the weight of what the four of them had actually built. Not just walls, a reason for people to risk their lives carrying frightened children across a country that wanted those children dead, in the certainty that at the end of the road there would be a door, and a welcome, and safety at last. In those early years, before any hat or ceremony existed, the founders sorted the students themselves, by hand and by eye. Each of the four took the children who seemed to belong with them, who carried the qualities they each prized and could best teach. Godric drew the brave ones to him, the bold and the daring, the children who would rather act than wait. Helga gathered the steady and the kind, the hard workers and the loyal, and pointedly also the ones the other three had passed over, because she would not have a single child go untaught simply for being ordinary. Rowena collected the quick minds, the curious, the ones who asked questions that had no easy answers, and Salazar chose the cunning and the ambitious, the resourceful, the children with a certain hunger in them that he recognized because it had once been his own. For a while, and it was a real while, years that ran into decades, it worked, and it worked beautifully. The four houses were not yet four walls between four kinds of children. They were four classrooms under one roof, four teachers each doing what they did best, and the students moved among all of them and learned from all of them. And the castle was full of a thing that the age had been starving for, which was magical children being safe, and being taught, and growing up unafraid. Whatever came after, that early stretch was real, and it mattered, and it is worth holding on to as the rest of the story darkens. For a time, four very different people set their differences down and built something good together, and thousands of children who would otherwise have been hunted or broken or simply lost, instead, grew up warm and clever and whole behind the walls these four had raised. That is not a small thing. It might be the best thing any of the four of them ever did. But four such people, so powerful and so unlike one another, could not hold to a single shared vision forever. The cracks were there from the beginning, fine as hairs, and they would widen. And along the way, each of the four was quietly building something of their own inside that castle, keeping something back, hiding something away, for reasons that ranged from love to fear to pride to a darkness that the others did not see until far too late. So let us take them one at a time and look at who they really were. Let us start with the loudest of them, the man whose name comes first, the one whose courage built the castle's walls and whose temper helped break the friendship that raised them. Let us start with Godric Gryffindor. Of the four founders, Godric Gryffindor is the one the later world remembers most fondly, and the one we may actually know the least about. His house became a byword for courage. His name is spoken with warmth 1,000 years on, and yet the man himself sits behind that warm reputation, like a figure glimpsed through firelight, large and bright, and not quite in focus. A part of that is his own doing. Godric was a man of action far more than a man of words, and men of action leave fewer records than men who sit and write. But part of it is something else, a handful of things he never explained and took with him when he died, and we will come to those. He came from the open moorland of the West Country, in the southwest of what is now England, wild high ground of heather and standing stone, where the weather comes in off the sea, and the land has a way of swallowing sound. The country shaped him. There is a plainness to everything we know of Godric, a directness, the manner of a man who grew up where the horizon is wide, and you can see trouble coming from a long way off. He did not have Rowena's love of complication, or Salazar's taste for the hidden. He liked things he could meet head-on. What set Godric apart, even among the four, was not raw power, though he had a great deal of that. It was a particular cast of character that the age desperately needed and rarely produced. Godric could not stand by while the weak were hurt. It was almost a compulsion in him, deeper than thought, where another powerful wizard might have looked at the hunting of magical children and seen a danger best avoided, a reason to keep his own head down and his own gift hidden. Godric looked at it and felt something in his chest that would not let him pass on. He went toward it. Again and again, by every account, he placed his own considerable body between a frightened child and the people who meant that child harm, and he did it not for glory, though glory found him anyway, but because he was simply unable to do otherwise. That is the heart of what the House of Gryffindor was built to honor. Not bravery as a kind of showing off, not courage as the absence of fear, but the specific willingness to stand up and put yourself at risk for someone who cannot protect themselves. Godric had it to a degree that frightened even his friends a little, and he prized it above every other quality a person could have. A clever coward, to Godric, was worth less than a slow-witted soul who would not run when running was the sensible thing. He would forgive almost any flaw in a person sooner than he would forgive the flaw of standing safely aside. He carried a sword, and the sword is one of the few hard objects from his life that the later world can still point to. It is a beautiful and a terrible thing, a wizard's blade made of pure silver and set with rubies, and it was forged for him by the goblins, who were then, as now, the great metal workers of the magical world. There is an old quarrel buried in the story of that sword, the goblins claiming in their version that the work was theirs and only lent to Godric, never given, a disagreement over ownership that would echo down the centuries and cause trouble long after every wizard who knew Godric was dust. The blade itself was made to do what the best magical objects do, which is to take in only that which makes it stronger and let everything else fall away. Over 1,000 years it would drink in things that should have destroyed it and come out harder for them, and it had a habit, a strange and stubborn loyalty, of presenting itself to any true child of Gryffindor who needed it badly enough, appearing in the hands of the worthy across the long centuries, as if Godric had wanted to make sure that his particular kind of courage would never be left to face the dark unarmed. There is a second object of Godric's that you would never guess to look at it, because it is, of all things, a hat. An old, pointed, patched and battered wizard's hat, the kind any traveller of the age might have worn, scuffed and creased, and the worse for wear. It sat on Godric's own head for years, before it became the most important object in the entire school, and the story of how that happened tells you something about how the four founders thought. The problem they faced was a quiet one that crept up on them as the years passed. They were not going to live forever. They sorted the students themselves, by hand, reading each child and placing them where they would best grow, but one day the four of them would be gone, and then who would do the sorting? They could train successors, but successors could be wrong, could be biased, could fail to see in a child what the founders would have seen. The four of them had built a school meant to last for centuries, and the question of how to keep choosing its students rightly long after their own deaths was not a small one. The answer, the way the old story tells it, came when Godric took the hat off his own head. The four of them together poured a measure of themselves into it, some portion of their own minds and judgment, and the particular things each of them looked for in a child, until the hat was no longer just a hat, but a kind of vessel, holding the gathered wisdom of all four founders. From then on, it could do what they had done. It could sit on a child's head, look into who that child was, weigh the courage and the loyalty and the cleverness and the cunning, and speak aloud the house where that child belonged. They had found a way to keep choosing their students for 1,000 years after they were dead, and they had done it together, the four of them in agreement, which is worth marking, because moments of the four of them in true agreement were already becoming rarer than they had been. That hat still sits in the castle. It still sorts the children, every year, and when it does, it is in some real sense the four founders still at work, their judgment preserved in the felt and the brim, Godric's and Helga's and Rowena's and Salazar's together, the last thing the four of them ever made as one. There is something almost unbearably sad in that, when you think about it too long. Whatever broke between them in life, some fragment of all four of them is still up there in the rafters of the Great Hall, still cooperating, still doing the one job they all agreed on, 1,000 years after they stopped speaking to one another. Now we come to the part of Godric's story that matters most for everything that follows, and it is not about his courage, or his sword, or his hat. It is about a friendship. Of the three other founders, the one Godric was closest to, by a long way, was Salazar Slytherin. This surprises people who only know the houses, because Gryffindor and Slytherin have spent 1,000 years as the great rivalry of the school, the lion and the serpent, the two houses set against each other in everything. But that rivalry grew out of soil that was once the exact opposite. In the beginning, Godric and Salazar were the best of friends, the bold one and the subtle one, the man who met things head-on and the man who came at them sidelong, each fascinated by what the other had that he himself lacked. They were the two who, some say, dreamed up the school together before Rowena and Helga ever joined them. They trusted each other completely, and it is precisely because the friendship was so real and so deep that its breaking did the damage it did. You cannot be betrayed by a stranger. The wound that opened between Gryffindor and Slytherin was as deep as it was, only because the bond had been as close as it was. What drove the wedge between them was a disagreement about the most basic question the school faced, which was simply this: who is allowed in? Godric's answer was open-handed and never wavered. Any child born with magic deserved a place behind the castle's walls. It did not matter to him who the child's parents were, whether they came from an old magical family stretching back generations, or whether the child was the first witch or wizard their family had ever produced. Born to ordinary parents who had no idea what their child even was. To Godric, the gift was the gift, and a child in danger was a child in danger, and the whole point of the school was to protect and teach every one of them, without exception. A magical child of ordinary parents was, if anything, more in need of the school's shelter than most, because they had no one at home who understood them. Godric would no more have turned such a child away than he would have walked past a drowning man. Salazar saw it differently, and as the years went on he saw it more and more differently, until the gap between his view and Godric's grew too wide to bridge. We will come to the full shape of Salazar's thinking when we reach his own part of this story, and we will try to understand it honestly rather than simply condemn it, because the truth of him is more complicated and in some ways sadder than the villain the later world remembers. But the short of it is that Salazar did not believe magical children of ordinary parents should be admitted to the school at all, and on this point his closest friend would not bend an inch. For a long time they argued it as friends argue, hard and often, but inside a bond that held. Godric believed, surely, that he could bring Salazar round, that the man he loved like a brother would see it in the end. He could not, and Salazar did not, and slowly the argument stopped being a thing that happened between two friends and started being the thing that defined them, a fault line running straight through the heart of the school and straight through the friendship that had built it. We will follow that fault line all the way to where it finally split. For now, it is enough to know that the seeds of the great rupture were planted in the closest of the four friendships, and that Godric, the bravest of them, the man who could face down any mob without flinching, was about to discover that there are some losses courage cannot prevent and cannot mend. And here we reach the things Godric Gryffindor took to his grave, which are fewer and quieter than the secrets of the others, but no less real. The first is simply the manner of his death and the place of his rest. For a man so famous, so loud in life, so central to the founding of the most renowned school in the magical world, it is a strange and haunting fact that no one knows where Godric Gryffindor is buried. There is no tomb anyone can visit, no marked grave, no record that survives of how or exactly when he died. A man who spent his life refusing to be invisible ended up, in death, almost completely hidden, and whether that was chance or his own final wish, no one can now say. The loudest of the four left the quietest grave. The second is heavier, and it is a thing of the heart rather than the record. Godric outlived the friendship that had meant the most to him, and he did so knowing, in some part of himself, that it had broken partly on his own stubbornness. He was right about who deserved to be taught. History came down firmly on his side, and the school still stands 1,000 years later, precisely because his vision won and Salazar's lost. But being right and being at peace are not the same thing, and a man does not lose a brother to a quarrel, however just the quarrel, without carrying the loss for the rest of his days. Whatever Godric felt in his final years about the friend he had failed to save, about the words that could not be unsaid, and the jewel that could not be undone, he kept to himself. He was not a man who spoke of such things. He took whatever grief and guilt he held over Salazar down into that unmarked grave, and it is one of the quiet tragedies of the founding that the bravest of the four could face anything in the world except, perhaps, the full reckoning of what he had lost. The man whose courage we honor in scarlet and gold was, at the last, a man who had lost his closest friend and could not get him back, and who knew it, and who said nothing. That is the secret behind the warm reputation. Not a hidden chamber, not a buried weapon, just an old grief, carried in silence by a man too proud and too sad to set it down. Hold that in mind as the rest of the story unfolds, because the rift that cost Godric his friend is the same rift that runs through everything still to come. If Godric Gryffindor is the founder the world remembers with the most warmth, Helga Hufflepuff is the one it tends to overlook, and that is a long-running injustice that the truth of her does not deserve. Her house spent centuries with a faintly unglamorous reputation, the house of the leftovers, the ones who were not brave enough for Gryffindor, or clever enough for Ravenclaw, or cunning enough for Slytherin. That reputation is not just unkind, it is close to the exact reverse of who Helga actually was, and what she actually believed, and once you understand her properly, it becomes hard not to think that she may have been, in the ways that matter most, the best of the four. She came from a broad valley in the west, soft and green and well-watered, the kind of country that grows things in abundance and asks for patience in return. Wales, in the old reckoning, the valley country where the hills roll rather than loom, and the land is generous to anyone willing to work it. You can feel that country in her. Helga did not have Godric's hard moorland edge, or Rowena's high cold cleverness, or Salazar's marsh-bred secrecy. She had the temperament of fertile ground, steady and warm and slow to anger, and underneath it, a strength that the louder three never quite reckoned with, because it did not announce itself. The thing to understand about Helga, the thing everything else grows out of, is what she believed about who deserved to be taught. The other three founders each had a type. Godric wanted the brave, Rowena wanted the clever, Salazar wanted the cunning, and, increasingly, the pure of blood. Each of them, in their way, was looking for a particular kind of excellence, and choosing the children who showed it. Helga alone among the four did not sort for equality at all. She would take any child who came, the brilliant and the slow, the bold and the timid, the gifted and the merely willing. It made no difference to her. If a child had magic and needed teaching, Helga would teach that child, and she would not love that child 1 ounce less for being ordinary. This was not softness, though it was often mistaken for it. It was a kind of conviction that was every bit as fierce as Godric's courage, just pointed in a gentler direction. Helga looked at the way the other three creamed off the children who shone, and she made a deliberate choice to be the one who caught everyone else, not because she could not tell the difference between a remarkable child and an unremarkable one, but because she did not think the difference was the point. The point, to Helga, was that the school existed to protect and raise magical children, all of them, and a child who would never be top of the class still deserved shelter from the mob and a warm bed and someone to believe they were worth the trouble. She built her house to be the place where no child was ever turned away for not being special enough, and 1,000 years of children who did not fit anywhere else found a home there because of it. When the founders made the sorting hat and poured themselves into it, Helga's portion carried that whole attitude with it. And you can still hear it. The hat, when it speaks of her house, speaks of welcome rather than of selection, of taking the children the others passed over and treating every one of them the same. Of all four founders, Helga is the one who asked the least of a child before agreeing to care for them, and that low bar was not a lack of standards, it was the highest standard of all. She had decided that a child's worth was not something they had to earn from her, they simply had it, by being a child in need, and her job was to act accordingly. The age she lived in, which threw away gifted children by the hundred for the crime of being inconvenient, had never seen anything like it. Her mark on the castle is the warmest part of the whole building, and it sits, fittingly, right next to the source of all comfort, which is the kitchens. Helga took charge of feeding the school, and the kitchens she established run beneath the great hall, in a vast warm cavern of a room that has never gone cold or empty in 1,000 years. Her own house she placed close by, down a particular corridor near those kitchens, so that her students would always be near the heart of the castle's warmth, near the smell of bread and the heat of the fires. The Hufflepuff common room is a round, low, golden place, full of soft chairs and overflowing plants, and burrow-like comfort, more like a warm den than a grand hall, and it is the only one of the four houses that feels less like a fortress and more like a home. That was Helga's design and Helga's instinct. She was not trying to impress the children. She was trying to make them feel safe and fed and held. There was real magic in her cooking, and not only in the figurative sense. Helga was a gifted enchantress of the domestic arts, the kind of magic that the grander wizards of the age looked down on, and that she elevated into something genuinely powerful. She knew charms for food and for healing, for sustenance and for protection, the deep, practical magic of keeping a great household of children fed and well and whole. A good deal of that knowledge was hers alone, passed to her and refined by her, and like so much of what the founders knew, much of it was never properly written down and died with her or thinned out across the generations until only fragments remained. We will never know the full extent of what Helga Hufflepuff could do with a kitchen and a kind intention, and that loss is one of the quieter griefs in the whole story of the founding. The one object of hers that survived, and survived to cause a great deal of trouble far down the centuries, is a cup, a small golden cup, two-handled and finely made, with a badger engraved upon it, the badger being the creature she took as her own. The badger is a good emblem for her, when you think about it. An animal that asks for little, troubles no one, keeps to its own quiet business, and yet will fight with astonishing ferocity if its home or its young are threatened. That was Helga exactly. Her cup was treasured as a thing of beauty, and, in some tellings, of real power, the sort of object that takes on potency from the greatness of the witch who owned it. She would have had no notion of the long dark road that cup would travel after she was gone, the hands it would pass through, the uses it would be put to by people who cared nothing for what she had stood for. For now it is enough to say that her cup outlived her, as the relics of all four founders outlived them, and that the gentlest of the four founders left behind an object that would one day be caught up in the very darkest events of the magical world. She could not have known. It is a mercy that she did not. Now, Helga's particular place among the four, the role she played that the others could not, was that of the peacemaker, and this is where her quiet strength mattered most, and where her secret, in the end, was made. The four founders were three strong-willed and frequently clashing personalities, and one person who held them together, and that person was Helga. Godric was all heat and impulse. Rowena was all cold height and certainty. Salazar was all subtlety and slow-burning grievance. Put those three in a room over a hard question, and you have the makings of a quarrel. And as the years passed, the quarrels came more often and cut deeper. Helga was the one who absorbed it. She was the one who stayed calm when the other three were rising to anger, who found the middle ground, who reminded them what they were all supposed to be doing, and for whom. A great deal of the reason the founding held together as long as it did, the reason the school survived its early decades despite the growing tension at its heart, is that Helga Hufflepuff spent those decades quietly doing the exhausting, thankless, invisible work of keeping three brilliant and difficult people from flying apart. And here is the thing about that kind of work. It leaves no record. The peacemaker's labor is, by its nature, the labor of things that did not happen, of fights that were headed off, of words that were talked down before they could be said, of a friendship held together one more season by someone standing quietly in the gap. We will never know how many times Helga kept the founding from breaking before it finally broke. We will never know what she saw, in those last years, of the slow ruin of the bond between Godric and Salazar, what she understood that the others were too angry to see, what she tried, and what she gave up on. She was present for all of it. She was closer to the truth of what tore the four of them apart than perhaps anyone, because she was the one trying to hold the pieces together, and she said almost nothing, and she wrote almost nothing, and what she knew she took with her. That is Helga's secret, and it is a strange and tender one. It is not a hidden weapon or a buried chamber. It is the entire private history of how the founding really failed, the inside story of the Great Rift, held in the heart of the one person who watched it happen from the closest possible distance and chose to keep it. She had spent her whole life refusing to give up on people, refusing to turn anyone away, and one imagines that even at the end she could not quite bring herself to set down a record of her friends at their worst. So she kept it. The full truth of the four founders falling out, the things only the peacemaker could have known, went into the ground with the gentlest of them, and we are left, 1,000 years later, piecing the story together from the outside, while the one person who could have told us all of it kept faith, to the last, with the friends who had broken her heart by breaking with each other. Before we leave Helga and climb up into the cold high tower of Rowena Ravenclaw, let me pause the story for just a moment, the way I promised I would not let it run too hard. If you are still with me, still drifting somewhere on the edge of sleep, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from tonight. Leave it in a comment, just the place, your town, or your country, or only the time on your clock. There are people falling asleep to this from every corner of the earth, in the small hours, and the late evenings, and the grey beginnings of mornings, and it is a quiet comfort to see how far the dark stretches, and how many of us are out here in it together. And if these long, slow histories are the thing that helps you let go of the day, you might think about following along, so the next one finds you when you need it. That is all. Settle back down now. The story goes on, and it is about to climb, because the next of the four lived higher and thought further than anyone else of her age, and her secret is the saddest of them all. Rowena Ravenclaw came from a glen in the north, a narrow, steep-sided valley of the kind the highlands fold themselves into, where the light comes late over the ridge and goes early behind it, and the cold sits in the bottom of the land like water in a cup. It is fitting country for her. There is something of the high, cold clarity of those places in everything we know of Rowena, a sense of altitude, of a mind operating somewhere a little above and a little apart from the ordinary run of people. She was the cleverest of the four founders. On this, the old accounts do not even bother to argue. She was very likely the cleverest witch of the entire age, and quite possibly one of the cleverest the magical world has ever produced. And she carried that the way the truly brilliant often do, as a kind of solitude. To understand Rowena, you have to understand that for her, magic was first and last a thing of the mind. Godric met the world with his courage and his sword. Helga met it with her warmth and her patience. Salazar met it with his cunning and his secrets. Rowena met it with thought, pure and relentless, and reaching always for the edge of what was known so she could push past it. She wanted to understand everything, not to use it necessarily, not for power in the way Salazar wanted power, but simply because a thing not yet understood was, to her, an itch that could not be left alone. She mapped magic that no one before her had mapped. She solved problems that the great wizards of the age had given up as unsolvable, and she poured an enormous amount of that restless brilliance into the castle itself. Almost everything about Hogwarts that is strange and clever and impossible came first out of Rowena's head. The staircases that move, the architecture that refuses to obey honest geometry, with more room inside than the outside should allow, the doors that are not always doors, the passages that fold back on themselves, the whole sense the building gives of being a puzzle that is gently playing with you. She designed the castle to reward a curious and flexible mind, and to quietly frustrate a rigid one, because she believed that the building should teach as much as the teachers did, that a child who learned to navigate a castle full of riddles and shifting paths would learn, without ever being told, how to think. The very layout of the school is a portrait of her mind, and 1,000 years of students have grown sharper for living inside it, without ever knowing whose intelligence they were walking around in. Her house she built around the love of learning for its own sake, and she gathered to it the curious and the quick, the children who asked questions that unsettled their elders, the ones who wanted to know why and were not satisfied with because I said so. The way into her house was, fittingly, a riddle, where the other houses use passwords, a thing you simply have to be told. The door to Ravenclaw's tower asks a question, and to enter you must answer it. Work it out. Think your way in. A child locked out of bed at night by a riddle they could not solve would have to sit with it, turn it over, reason it through, and Rowena thought that was exactly as it should be. Even getting to sleep, in her house, was supposed to make you think. The emblem she took was the eagle, the bird that flies highest and sees furthest, and it suited her, the creature that looks down on the world from an altitude the rest of us cannot reach. She made for herself a thing that became the most precious and the most ill-fated of all the founder's relics, and it was, of all objects, a diadem, a delicate circlet, a crown of a kind, made to sit upon the head, and it was no mere ornament. Into it, Rowena had worked an enchantment of astonishing subtlety, a magic that was said to sharpen the wisdom of whoever wore it. to make a clever mind cleverer still. Around it ran an inscription, a few words that held the whole of her creed, the belief that wit beyond all measure is the greatest treasure a person can possess. That was Rowena entire, carved into a band of metal. To her, intelligence was not one virtue among several. It was the highest thing, the treasure above all treasures, and she had built an object that could give more of it to anyone wise enough to wear it. The diadem was her masterwork, the deepest expression of who she was, and it would become the instrument of the greatest sorrow of her life. Because Rowena Ravenclaw, the high, cold, solitary genius, had a daughter. Her name was Helena, and she was, by the accounts that survive, very like her mother, as clever, as proud, as hungry to be remarkable. And there is a particular kind of difficulty that grows up between a brilliant parent and a brilliant child who is too alike, and it grew up between these two. Helena lived her whole life in the shadow of a mother famous across the magical world for her genius, and she wanted, more than she wanted almost anything, to step out of that shadow and be celebrated in her own right, to be known not as the daughter of the great Rowena Ravenclaw, but as someone extraordinary herself. That hunger, which her mother had perhaps planted without ever meaning to, would destroy her. For Helena did a terrible thing. She stole the diadem. She took her mother's masterwork, the circlet of enhanced wisdom, the deepest treasure Rowena had ever made, and she ran away with it. The reason, the old story says, was exactly the hunger we have been speaking of. Helena believed that if she wore the diadem, if she took its power for herself, she would become cleverer than her mother, would finally surpass the woman whose shadow she had never escaped, and would be remarkable at last on her own terms. So she took it, and she fled, far away, across the sea and the land, into the deep forests of Albania, and she hid herself there with the stolen treasure, and she did not come back. What this did to Rowena, no account can fully capture, but the shape of it is clear. She lost her daughter and her masterwork in a single stroke, and worse, she lost them to a betrayal, her own child turning against her, fleeing with the one object that meant the most to her, vanishing into a distant country with no word and no trace. And Rowena, the woman who had solved every problem the age put in front of her, who had mapped the unmappable and understood the ununderstandable, could not solve this one. She could not find her daughter. She could not undo what had been done. The greatest mind of her generation came up against the loss of her own child and was as helpless as anyone. It broke her. The accounts say plainly that Rowena Ravenclaw began to sicken after Helena fled, that she declined, that the grief of it ate at her health until she was dying of it. And there is an old and aching tradition that she died, quite simply, of a broken heart. But the story does not end with Rowena's grief, and this is where it becomes one of the darkest threads in the whole history of the Founders, a thread that does not even need the rift to make it terrible. Among those who knew Helena was a man, a wizard, a baron, who loved her. He had loved her, it seems, for a long time, and his love had not been returned. Helena did not want him, but his feeling for her was deep, and it did not fade. And so when Rowena lay dying, desperate above all things to see her daughter one last time before the end, to make peace with her, perhaps simply to look upon her child's face once more, it was to this man that Rowena turned. She asked him to find Helena. She asked him to go to wherever her daughter had hidden, and to bring her home, so that mother and daughter might be reunited, before death took the choice away forever. He agreed. A man in love, asked by the dying mother of the woman he loved to go and find her. Of course he agreed, and he set out for the forests of Albania to bring Helena back. He found her, against all the odds, in that wild, distant country. He found the place where Helena had hidden herself with the stolen diadem, and he told her that her mother was dying, that her mother wanted her, that she must come home. And Helena, proud and stubborn, and perhaps unable to face what she had done, refused. She would not go back, whether out of pride or shame, or the simple inability to undo the break she had made. She told the man who had crossed the world to find her that she would not return. And here, the man's love turned, in an instant, into something monstrous. Enraged by her refusal, undone by the journey and the rejection, and whatever storm of feeling had been building in him, he lost himself completely, and in his fury he killed her. He killed the woman he had loved, the daughter Rowena had sent him to save, struck her down in that foreign forest because she would not come home with him. And then, The moment it was done, the full horror of what he had become crashed over him, and the rage drained out and left only the ruin of it. A man standing over the body of the woman he loved, having killed her with his own hands. He could not live with it. He turned the same blade on himself and died there beside her. In the Albanian wood, two bodies, in the dark, and the stolen diadem, hidden somewhere nearby, that no one would find for a very long time. Helena, before she died, had hidden the diadem. She had concealed it inside the hollow of an ancient tree in that forest, tucked it away in the rotten heart of the wood, and her death meant that the secret of its hiding place died with her, almost. The diadem lay there in the dark of the tree, lost, while the centuries turned over it, until, a very long time later, in a way we will not follow tonight, someone learned the secret from Helena's lingering spirit, and went and dug it out of the tree, and put it to a use that would have horrified everyone, Rowena most of all. But that is a thread for another night. What matters here is that Rowena's masterwork was lost in the heart of a foreign forest, soaked in the blood of her daughter and the man who killed her, and it would stay lost for 1,000 years. And now we come to Rowena's secret, the thing she took to her grave, and it is the cruelest of all four, because she did not take it knowingly. She took it because she never learned the truth at all. Rowena died not knowing what had become of her daughter. The man she had sent to find Helena never returned to tell her, because the man she had sent to find Helena had murdered Helena and then killed himself in a forest 1,000 miles away. So Rowena, in her last days, lay dying with her question unanswered. She did not know that Helena was dead. She did not know that the man she had trusted, the man who loved her daughter, had become her daughter's killer. She did not know where the diadem was, or that it lay hidden in a hollow tree beside her child's body. She died inside the not knowing, her last hope that her daughter might be found and brought home, dissolving into a silence that was never filled. The cleverest woman of the age died with the one thing she most wanted to understand, the fate of her own child, locked away from her forever. That is the secret Rowena Ravenclaw took to her grave. Not a thing she hid, but a thing that was hidden from her, the truth of her daughter's death, kept from her by the very tragedy that made it. And there is a final, terrible echo to it. Helena did not pass entirely out of the world when she died. Her spirit remained, lingering in the castle her mother had helped to build, drifting its corridors as one of its resident ghosts, pale and proud and sorrowful, known to the later students only as the Grey Lady, a quiet drifting figure who rarely speaks and carries an old sadness no one can name. For 1,000 years, Helena's ghost has wandered the halls of Hogwarts, carrying the secret of what she did and what was done to her, the stolen diadem, the lie of her flight, her mother's broken heart, the death in the forest. The daughter haunts the mother's school still, keeping the secret that killed them both, and Rowena, wherever she lies, never knew that her child was even there. Of all the things the four founders took into the dark with them, this is the one that aches the longest. A mother who died not knowing her daughter was dead. A daughter who has spent 1,000 years as a ghost in her mother's halls, unable to undo a single moment of any of it. The high, cold genius, who understood everything, brought down at the last by the one mystery she could not solve, which was the heart of her own child. Sit with that for a moment, in the dark, before we go down into the deep places of the castle, because the next of the four founders was the one who built those deep places, and his secret was not a sorrow done to him, but a darkness he chose, and made, and hid, and carried with a deliberate and terrible patience, all the way to the grave. Salazar Slytherin came up out of the fens, the low, wet country in the east where the land lies flat and the water lies everywhere, marshland of reeds and black pools, and mist that rises off the ground in the early morning and hides the world. It is country that keeps its secrets. You cannot see far across a fen. The paths through it are known only to those who live there, and a stranger who wanders in without a guide can be swallowed without trace. Salazar was a child of that landscape in every part of his nature, and if you want to understand him, you could do worse than to start with the fen itself. A place of hidden ways and concealed depths, beautiful in its own strange manner, and quietly, patiently dangerous to anyone who does not understand it. He is the founder the later world remembers as the villain, and there is real cause for that, as we will see. But the easy version of Salazar, The cardboard dark wizard who hated and schemed for no reason is not the truth, and the truth is more unsettling than the cartoon, because the truth has reasons in it, and reasons you can almost follow before they turn into something monstrous. Let us try to take him as he was, which means trying to understand him, which is not at all the same as excusing him. Salazar was cunning in the way the other three were not. Godric was brave, Helga was kind, Rowena was clever, and Salazar was something harder to name. A strategist, a reader of people and situations, a man who could see 3 moves ahead and keep his real intentions hidden behind a calm and reasonable face. He was ambitious to a degree the age had no room for. He wanted things, large things, and he had the patience and the subtlety to work toward them across years, while no one around him quite noticed what he was doing. And he had a gift none of the others shared, a gift that set him apart, and that has marked his house ever since. He could speak to snakes. He was a parcel mouth, able to understand the hissing speech of serpents, and to answer it, a rare and faintly sinister ability that the magical world has always regarded with unease. The snake was his chosen emblem, and it was a true one, subtle, silent, beautiful, cold, and capable of striking faster than the eye can follow. His house he built around ambition and cunning and resourcefulness, and he gathered to it the children who had that hunger he recognized, the ones who wanted to be great and were willing to be clever and ruthless about getting there. He placed his common room down in the deep parts of the castle, in the dungeons below the surface, in cold green rooms that sit beneath the level of the loch so that the light coming through the windows is the filtered underwater light of the lake, dim and shifting and green. It is the most atmospheric and the most unsettling of the 4 houses, a place of low ceilings and stone, and the constant presence of the dark water pressing in from outside, and it suited the man who made it. While the others built upward into the light, Salazar always preferred to build down into the dark, and he was more comfortable in the deep cold places than anywhere the sun reached. Now we come to the belief that made him the villain of the story, and we have to handle it carefully because it is both genuinely monstrous and, in its origin, almost understandable, and the place where understandable turns into monstrous is the most important thing in his whole life. Salazar did not believe that magical children of ordinary, non-magical parents should be allowed into the school. This was the rock the founding finally broke upon, and the easy reading is that he was simply a bigot, that he hated such children out of pure prejudice, and by the end that is close to what he had become. But the root of it, the thing it grew out of, was fear, and the fear was not entirely irrational, and that is what makes it so dangerous. Remember the world they lived in. Remember that this was an age when ordinary people hunted and killed witches and wizards out of terror and superstition, when a magical child could bring a mob to the door, when the whole reason for building a hidden castle in the remote north was that the non-magical world was, quite literally, deadly to magical people. The founders lived under that threat every day. They had all, almost certainly, seen the results of it, the burnings, the drownings, the children turned in by frightened families, and Salazar drew a conclusion from that threat that the others did not draw. He looked at the children of ordinary parents, the ones with no magical family, raised among the very people who hunted his kind, and he saw a risk. Those children had one foot in the non-magical world. Their parents, their families, their childhood homes were all on the other side of the line, among the people who burned witches, and Salazar feared, deep in his fen-bred suspicious heart, that such children could not be fully trusted, that they might carry the loyalties or the prejudices of the non-magical world in with them, that they might, in some moment of crisis, betray the secret of the school and the safety of everyone in it to the very people the school existed to hide from. You can see the shape of the reasoning. It begins from a real danger. The non-magical world genuinely was hostile. The secrecy of the school genuinely was a matter of life and death. And from that real and reasonable starting point, Salazar reasoned his way to a conclusion that was poisonous, which was that an entire category of innocent children should be shut out, treated as suspect, denied shelter, because of who their parents happened to be. That is how the worst ideas usually work. They do not start from nowhere. They start from a fear that has some truth in it, and then they curdle. They generalize. They harden a sensible caution into a cruel doctrine, and the people holding them can always point back to the kernel of real danger and say, "But I am only being careful." I am only protecting us. Salazar could tell himself, right to the end, that he was the one taking the threat seriously, that the others were naive, that their open-handed welcome would one day get everyone killed. He was wrong, and the wrongness of it hardened into something hateful, but he never stopped believing he was the realist among dreamers, and a man who believes that about himself is capable of almost anything. For years, the disagreements stayed inside the bounds of argument, even if the arguments grew bitter. Salazar pressed his view, the others resisted it, and Helga held them together, while Godric and Salazar, the two old friends, ground against each other on the one question neither would yield. But Salazar was not only a man who argued, he was a man who acted in secret, who built in the dark while others talked in the light, and at some point, no one knows exactly when, he stopped merely arguing for his vision and began, quietly, alone, to prepare a way to enforce it. And what he prepared is the great hidden horror at the heart of the castle, the thing he built beneath the school and told no one about, the secret that defines him above all others. He built a hidden chamber, deep beneath the castle, far below even the dungeons of his own house, a concealed place buried so well in the bones of the building that it could sit undiscovered for 1,000 years, while generations of the most powerful witches and wizards in the world walked over it every day. The Chamber of Secrets, as it came to be called, and its existence was Salazar's deepest secret, kept from his 3 closest companions, kept from everyone, sealed away where only his own true heir would ever be able to open it. He built it into the school he had helped to found, beneath the children he had helped to gather and protect, a hidden room with a hidden purpose, and the founding's whole spirit of openness and shelter was betrayed in the act of building it, because a school is supposed to have no rooms that its keepers do not know about, and Salazar gave it one. And he did not leave the chamber empty. He placed something inside it, a creature, a guardian, a weapon. He sealed within the Chamber of Secrets a basilisk, the king of serpents, one of the most lethal creatures in the entire magical world, a monstrous serpent of enormous size and almost unkillable resilience, whose very gaze brings death to anyone who meets it directly. The means by which such a creature is made are dark and dreadful, and we will not dwell on them in the small hours of the night. What matters is the purpose. Salazar did not hide a monster beneath the school for no reason. He left the basilisk in the chamber as the instrument of his doctrine, the means by which, one day, his vision would be enforced by force. The chamber was to be opened, the old story says, only by his true heir, a descendant who shared his gift of speaking to serpents, and when that heir came, the heir would loose the monster, and the monster would purge the school of all those Salazar deemed unworthy of it, the children of ordinary parents, the ones he had wanted to shut out and could not. He could not win the argument with his living friends, so he built a way to win it long after he was dead, a slow, patient horror set ticking beneath the castle, waiting across the centuries for the right descendant to come and finish what he had started. Think about the cold patience of that. Salazar Slytherin lost an argument, and his response was to build a hidden chamber, breed a monster, seal it beneath a school full of children, and leave it there as a 1,000-year-long threat against the very kind of innocent child the school existed to protect. All so that someday, in a future he would never see, his side of the argument could be settled in blood. That is the darkness at the center of him, and it is a real darkness. No softening of his fears can explain it away. The fear was understandable, the chamber was not. Somewhere along the way, the careful man who worried about the school's safety became a man who would murder children to win a point, and he hid that transformation so well that the people closest to him never saw the whole of it until it was too late. Like each of the 4, Salazar had a treasured object that outlived him, and his was a locket, a heavy golden locket, ornate, marked with a serpentine letter S, worked into the metal in green stones, an object of real beauty and real darkness, fitting for the man who made it. He prized it above his other possessions, and unlike the cup or the diadem, which passed out of their makers' families by theft or accident, Salazar's locket went down the way he would have wanted it to go, through his own bloodline, handed from descendant to descendant across the centuries, as a mark of their descent from the great Salazar Slytherin himself. That bloodline matters, because Salazar's plan depended on it. The chamber could only be opened by his heir, by one who carried his gift of speaking to serpents, and so the whole dreadful design hung on his blood, continuing down through the generations, until at last it produced the descendant who would do what he could not. It did continue. The gift of Parseltongue passed down Salazar's line through 1,000 years of descendants, growing fainter in some generations and stronger in others, carried by a family that clung with increasing desperation to its descent from Slytherin as the one glory left to it, and in the fullness of time, far down that long line, the blood did at last produce an heir who carried Salazar's gift and Salazar's hatred both, and that heir did go down into the deep places of the castle, and did open the chamber of secrets, and did loose the monster upon the school, exactly as Salazar had intended, 1,000 years after Salazar's death. The patient horror beneath the castle did its maker's bidding in the end. But that is a story for other nights, the story of the heir and the diary, and the second opening of the chamber, and it is a long and terrible one. Tonight it is enough to know that Salazar's design worked, that the thing he hid and the bloodline he counted on came together at last in the way he had planned, and that the cold patience of the man who built 1,000-year weapon was, in the end, rewarded. There are few things in the whole history of the founders more chilling than that. So what did Salazar Slytherin take to his grave? More than any of the others, and more deliberately. He took the existence of the Chamber of Secrets. His three closest companions, the people he had built a castle and a school and a life beside, never knew the chamber was there. He kept it from Godric, the friend he had loved like a brother. He kept it from Helga, who would have been horrified past speaking. He kept it from Rowena, whose cleverness might actually have uncovered it, had she been given any reason to look. He walked among them for years with the knowledge of the hidden room and the sleeping monster locked behind his calm face, and he let them go to their own graves, never knowing that beneath the school they had all built together lay a weapon meant to murder the very children they were protecting. That is a betrayal so deep it is hard to find the bottom of it. The whole founding was an act of trust, 4 people pooling everything they had and were, and Salazar held back this one enormous secret and built it into the foundations, and said nothing, ever, to anyone. He took the location of the chamber, sealed so that only his heir could find and open it, hidden from the wisest and most powerful people of the age, and from 1,000 years of their successors. He took the full truth of his plan, the patient design of the heir and the purge, the cold architecture of a hatred meant to outlive him by a millennium, and he took, as far as anyone can tell, his lack of repentance. There is no account of Salazar Slytherin ever turning from his course, ever softening, ever coming to regret what he had built. The others carried griefs and losses and things left unreconciled. Salazar seems to have carried a settled, unbroken conviction that he had been right all along, that his friends were the foolish ones, and that the weapon he had hidden beneath their school was a wise precaution that they were too sentimental to understand. He went into the dark, wherever his grave is, with his secret intact and his certainty intact, and he had built things in the world to make sure that certainty would have its day long after he was gone. He is the only one of the 4 whose secret was not a sorrow, but a sin, not a thing hidden from him, but a thing he hid from everyone, not an accident of tragedy, but a deliberate work of patience and malice, dressed up to himself as foresight. And it worked. That is the part that should keep you a little unsettled even as you drift towards sleep. The gentlest secret of the 4, Helga's, was a kindness, the keeping of her friends' private failures out of love. The cruelest, Rowena's, was an accident of grief. Salazar's was a plan, and the plan succeeded, and the proof of it is that 1,000 years later, the monster he hid did exactly what he built it to do. Of all 4 founders, he is the one whose hand reached the furthest past his own death, and it reached out to do harm. We have met the 4 of them now, one at a time, and we have seen what each of them hid. But the secrets did not stay sealed in 4 separate lives. They grew out of one shared catastrophe, the slow and terrible falling apart of the friendship that built the school. And it is time now to follow that rupture itself, the great rift, the breaking of the 4, because everything else flows out of it. It did not happen all at once. That is the first thing to understand, and the saddest. The breaking of the 4 founders was not a single dramatic moment, but a long erosion, years of it, the gradual hardening of a disagreement into a wall. In the early days, as we have seen, it worked, and it worked well. Four extraordinary people set their differences aside and built something good, and for a real stretch of time the friction between them was the productive friction of strong minds sharpening one another. But the one great question, the question of who belonged in the school, would not resolve, and a disagreement that cannot be resolved and cannot be set aside has only one direction it can go, which is deeper. At the heart of it stood the two old friends, Godric and Salazar, and the particular agony of the rift is that it ran straight through what had been the closest bond of the four. Godric, open-handed, certain that every magical child deserved shelter, unable to imagine turning a child away for the crime of having ordinary parents. Salazar, suspicious, certain that the children of the non-magical world were a danger that the others were too soft to see, growing harder and more closed with every passing year. Between them, the question went around and around, and each time it came around it had a little more anger in it, a little more hurt, a little less of the old trust. Helga stood in the middle and held what she could hold. Rowena, in her high cold way, came down on the side of openness, of learning offered to all who could receive it, but she was increasingly lost in her own concerns and, before the end, in her own private grief over Helena, and so the weight of the conflict fell mostly on the two men who had once been brothers and were now, slowly, becoming enemies. You can imagine, even if no record describes it, what those last years inside the castle must have been like. The four of them still running a school together, still teaching the children, still keeping up the work that had to be done, while underneath everything the friendship rotted. The arguments that started over admissions and spread, the way such things do, into everything else. The cold silences, the taking of sides, the way a room changes when two people in it can no longer stand each other and everyone else has to pretend not to notice. Salazar drawing further and further into his own deep places, his own house, his own secrets, his own certainty that he alone saw the danger clearly. Godric growing more frustrated, more wounded, less able to reach the friend who was disappearing into hardness in front of him, and neither of them able to stop, because neither could give up the thing they believed without giving up something essential about who they were. And then, at last, it came to a head. The old accounts grow thin here, and they do not all agree on the details, which is fitting, because the breaking of the four founders is exactly the kind of event that hardens into legend and loses its edges in the telling. But the shape that comes down to us is this. The argument between Godric and Salazar finally boiled over past the point of words. Whatever the last provocation was, whatever was finally said that could not be taken back, the two old friends faced each other, not as colleagues quarreling but as opponents, and there was, in the oldest tellings, a duel. The two most powerful wizards in the castle, the brave one and the cunning one, the lion and the serpent, who had built the school together and dreamed it together and loved each other once, turned their wands on one another at last. No one truly knows what that duel was like. Two founders of Hogwarts at the full height of their power, throwing magic at each other inside the walls they had raised together, and perhaps it is better that no one knows, because the imagination supplies something more terrible than any record could. What is clear is the outcome. The duel settled nothing and healed nothing, as such things never do, but it ended the pretense that the four could go on together. The friendship was over. The founding, as a fellowship of four, was over, and Salazar Slytherin, defeated not in the sense of being beaten in a contest, but in the deeper sense of having finally lost the argument and the friendship, and the place that had been his home, made his choice. He left. He walked out of the castle he had helped to build, and the school he had helped to found, and the deep green dungeons he had made his own, and he went out into the night, and away, and he did not come back. The man of the fens returned to the hidden country he had come from, or to somewhere like it, somewhere apart and concealed, and the great fellowship of the four became a fellowship of three. He left behind his house, which went on without its founder, carrying his name and his colours and his values down the centuries. He left behind his secret, the chamber and the monster, sealed in the depths beneath the very people he was abandoning, waiting for the heir who would one day come. And he left behind a wound in the heart of the school that has never fully closed in 1,000 years. Because here is the thing about the rift. It did not end when Salazar walked out the door. It hardened into the structure of the school itself. The division between Gryffindor and Slytherin, between the open hand and the closed one, between Godric's vision and Salazar's, did not die with the founders. It was built into the four houses, passed down with the names and the crests, so that 1,000 years later, the children sorted into Gryffindor, and the children sorted into Slytherin, would inherit, without ever choosing it, the old enmity of the two men who made their houses. The lion and the serpent have been set against each other for a millennium, because two friends could not agree on who deserved to be taught, and tore their friendship apart over it. And every child who has ever felt the pull of that rivalry, on either side, has been living inside the long shadow of a quarrel that ended before their great-great-grandparents were born. The founders are gone. The rift they left is still here, still shaping the lives of children who have never heard the full story of where it came from. That may be the most lasting thing any of the four ever did, and it is the saddest, because it is the thing they would all, even Salazar, have least wished to leave behind. The three who remained carried on. Godric, Helga, and Rowena kept the school running without the fourth of their number, and the castle endured, and the children kept coming, and the work went on. But it was not the same, and it could not be, with one of the four gone into the dark, and the friendship that had founded everything broken past mending. Each of the three would, in time, face their own ending. Rowena would lose her daughter and sicken and die of the grief of it, never knowing the truth. Helga would keep her peace and her secrets and her endless patience to the last, and take the whole inside story of the founding's failure into the ground with her. Godric would carry his silent grief over the brother he had lost and go to an unmarked grave that no one has ever found. And Salazar, somewhere far away, would die with his certainty and his hidden chamber intact, his hand still reaching out of the future to do the harm he had planned. 4 extraordinary lives, 4 lonely endings, 4 secrets carried down into 4 graves, only one of which we can even guess the location of. Let us gather it all together now, in the quiet, and look at what the 4 of them left in the dark behind them, the secrets and the relics, and the long afterlives of things that should have ended with their makers. 4 objects survived the 4 founders, one from each, and each became a vessel of something far larger than itself. Godric's sword, silver and ruby set and goblin made, which would present itself across the centuries to the worthy children of his house, and drink in the things that should have destroyed it, and come out stronger, a blade of courage that outlived the courageous man who carried it. Helga's cup, golden and badger-marked, the gentle relic of the gentlest founder, which would travel a long dark road, through hands that cared nothing for what she stood for. Rowena's diadem, her masterwork, the circlet of wisdom, lost in the heart of an Albanian forest beside the body of the daughter who stole it, hidden in a hollow tree to wait 1,000 years for the wrong person to find it. And Salazar's locket, the serpent-marked treasure he passed down his own bloodline, the proof of descent that would matter so terribly when his heir at last came of age. 4 objects, 4 founders, 4 threads running out of the deep past and down through the whole later history of the magical world, carrying the founders' power into events the founders could never have imagined. The makers are dust. The things they made are still out there in the story, still doing harm and good, still being fought over, 1,000 years on. And then there are the secrets that were not objects at all, the things the 4 took into the dark in the most literal sense, and they are stranger and sadder than any relic. We have already met the worst of them, in passing, but it deserves a longer look in the quiet, because it is still happening. Helena Ravenclaw never left. When the man who loved her struck her down in that foreign forest, her spirit did not pass on into whatever lies beyond for the magical dead. She stayed, she came back, across all that distance, to the one place that had ever truly been hers, the castle her mother had helped to raise, and she has drifted its corridors ever since, for 1,000 years and more, as the ghost the students call the Grey Lady. She is a quiet presence. Those who have seen her describe a tall, proud, sorrowful young woman, beautiful in a remote and chilly way, who moves through the halls without speaking and turns away from anyone who tries to approach her. The students who share the castle with her know almost nothing about who she is, only that she is the ghost of Ravenclaw House, pale and silent and sad, and that she does not welcome questions. For 1,000 years she has carried her silence with her through the same stone passages, night after night, century after century, and the weight of what she carries is almost beyond imagining. She carries the memory of the theft, the moment she took her mother's masterwork and ran. She carries the long hiding in the forest, the slow realization of what she had done. She carries the man arriving with the news that her mother was dying, and her own refusal, the proud, terrible no that sealed both their fates. She carries the moment of her death at his hands, and she carries, above all, the knowledge that her mother died never learning the truth, that the question Rowena most wanted answered went into the grave unanswered, because the answer was Helena's own death. 1,000 years is a very long time to keep a secret. Think of the silence of it. Generation after generation of clever, curious Ravenclaw children passing the Grey Lady in the halls, never knowing that the sad, pale ghost gliding past them was the founder's own daughter, never knowing that she alone held the truth of where the lost diadem had gone, the relic their entire house revered, missing for 10 centuries while its keeper drifted past them every night, with the answer locked inside her, and her lips sealed by shame. She could have ended the mystery at any moment across 1,000 years. She did not. The shame of what she had done, the inability to face it even in death, kept her silent generation after generation, and the diadem stayed lost in its hollow tree, and the secret she had taken from her own mother she went on taking, from everyone, for 1,000 years. It did, in the end, come out, and the manner of it is a small dark coda that we will not follow far tonight. Late in the long history of the castle, someone managed to win from the Grey Lady the secret she had guarded for so long, drew out of her the truth of the diadem's hiding place, through patience and flattery and a sympathy that was not sincere, and that person used what she told them to do something that would have broken Rowena's heart all over again, retrieving the diadem and turning her masterwork to a purpose as dark as anything in this whole story. Helena gave up the secret to the wrong person, just as her mother had once trusted the wrong man, the same terrible mistake echoing down 1,000 years from mother to daughter, trust misplaced, a treasure lost, a love turned to ruin. The Grey Lady has had a long time to regret the day she finally spoke. She is still there, still drifting, still sorrowful. If you ever found yourself, in some impossible way, walking those corridors at night and saw a pale, proud young woman turn away from you in silence, you would be looking at one of the oldest unhealed wounds in the magical world, the founder's daughter, still keeping her mother's school 1,000 years after she broke her mother's heart. And she is not the only ghost the rift and its sorrows left behind in the castle. There is another, and he is bound to her by the worst night of both their lives, and his penance has lasted just as long. The man who loved Helena, the man her mother sent to find her, the man who killed her, and then himself in that Albanian forest, he too did not pass on. He came back as well, to the same castle, and he has haunted it for 1,000 years, alongside the woman he murdered, a ghost the students know as the Bloody Baron. He is a grim and frightening presence, silver grey like all the castle's ghosts but marked, terribly, with the silver bloodstains of his crime and his suicide, the stains he has worn for 10 centuries and will wear forever, the visible record of the worst thing he ever did written across him for all time. And he wears something else. He wears chains, heavy silver chains, that he put on himself in penance, a self-imposed punishment for the murder of the woman he loved, and he has dragged them through the halls of the school for 1,000 years, as a sign of a remorse that has never once lifted. Consider the two of them, sharing a castle for 1,000 years, the woman he killed and the man who killed her, both bound to the same stone halls, both unable to leave, both carrying the weight of that single terrible night through century after century. She drifts away from him whenever he comes near. He follows at a distance, never approaching, never forgiven, never able to undo the moment that damned them both. 1,000 years of the same silent avoidance, the same unbridgeable distance, the murderer in his chains and his victim in her sorrow, haunting the same school, passing the same children, keeping the same secret, neither of them ever free. It is one of the strangest and most haunting facts of the whole castle that two of its resident ghosts are a murderer and his victim, locked together by guilt and grief for 1,000 years, and that the children who live among them mostly have no idea of the tragedy drifting through their hallways every night. There is a small detail that tells you how much the Baron's grief weighs, even after all this time. The castle has, among its many spirits, a poltergeist, a chaotic and malicious presence that torments the students and respects almost nothing and no one, that delights in cruelty and answers to no authority in the school. And there is exactly one being in the entire castle that this poltergeist fears, one presence that can stop its mischief with a look, and it is the bloody Baron. Even a creature that fears nothing fears the grey grief and the cold remorse of the man in chains, the depth of whose sorrow is so great and so old that it cools the air around him and silences even the castle's most fearless troublemaker. That is the measure of what the Baron carries. 1,000 years of penance have made his grief into something even the fearless step back from, and still it is not enough, and still he is not free, and still, somewhere in the halls tonight, he is dragging his chains through the dark, a little way behind the woman who will never turn to face him. Now come down with me, in your mind, into the deepest part of the castle, below the dungeons, below the green underwater rooms of Slytherin House, below everything the students ever see, to the place Salazar built and hid and left waiting. Because the Chamber of Secrets did not simply sit there as a dead fact after Salazar walked out into the night. It became a presence in the life of the school, a rumor, a legend, a fear, for 1,000 years, and the long, strange history of that hidden room is worth telling on its own. For most of those 1,000 years, the chamber was a story and nothing more, or so everyone hoped. The tale was passed down, founder to teacher to student, generation after generation, that Salazar Slytherin had built a secret chamber somewhere beneath the school before he left, and that he had sealed within it a horror that only his true heir would ever be able to release. A monster meant to finish the work he could not, the purging of the school of all those he had deemed unworthy. It was the kind of story that 1,000 years of children would half believe and half dismiss, a dark legend whispered in the dormitories late at night, the sort of thing the teachers would deny and the students would never quite stop wondering about. Was there really a hidden chamber down there in the deep stone? Was there really a monster, sleeping, waiting? Most who heard the story decided it was just a story, a grim old legend with no truth in it. They were wrong. People searched for it, across the centuries. The chamber became a kind of riddle that the curious and the ambitious returned to again and again. Generations of witches and wizards convinced they could be the ones to find the legendary hidden room and prove the old story true or false at last. They searched the dungeons, they searched the deep passages, they tested the walls and the floors and the foundations, and they found nothing every time, because Salazar Slytherin had been the subtlest and most secretive of the four founders, a man who had built his whole life around concealment, and the chamber he hid was hidden by a master of hiding. It could only be opened by one who shared his own rare gift, the ability to speak to serpents, and no amount of searching by those without that gift would ever reveal it. The chamber sat in the dark beneath 1,000 years of searchers, perfectly concealed, waiting not for the clever or the determined, but specifically for Salazar's own blood to come and speak the words that would open it. All the searching in the world was useless, because the lock was not a lock that searching could pick. It was a lock that answered only to Salazar's descent. And the monster. The thing he left in the chamber was a basilisk, and the basilisk is among the most feared creatures the magical world knows. It is an enormous serpent, capable of growing to a tremendous size across a long life, and it can live for a very, very long time, far longer than any wizard, which is part of the horror of Salazar's design. He did not need the monster to last a few years. He needed it to last centuries, to be alive and waiting whenever his heir finally came. And the basilisk, with its vast span of life, could do exactly that. It could sleep in the dark beneath the school for 1,000 years, and wake as deadly as the day it was sealed in. Its gaze brings instant death to anyone who looks directly into its eyes, and even a glimpse of it reflected or indirect can freeze a person solid. Its venom is among the deadliest substances in existence. It is, in short, very nearly the perfect weapon for the purpose Salazar intended, a near unkillable killer that could wait out the centuries and strike the moment his blood returned to wake it. The cold patience of the man is written into the very nature of the creature he chose. He picked a monster that could outwait 1,000 years, because 1,000 years was exactly how long his hatred was prepared to wait. And in the fullness of time, the chamber was opened, not once but twice, by the heir Salazar had been waiting for, and by an echo of that heir's younger self. And on both occasions, the monster woke, and the old horror came alive again, and the school knew terror it had not known since the founding. The details of those openings are long and dark and belong to other nights. The story of the heir who came down Salazar's line carrying his gift and his hatred. The deaths, the fear, the eventual confrontation deep in the chamber itself. Tonight it is enough to know that Salazar's thousand-year weapon did, in the end, go off. The legend turned out to be true. The chamber was real, the monster was real, and the patient malice of the most secretive founder reached out of the distant past to do precisely the harm he had built it to do. There are not many examples, in all the long history of the magical world, of a hatred so patient that it could wait 1,000 years and still strike true. Salazar Slytherin built one, beneath a school full of children, and then he walked away into the night and left it ticking, and 1,000 years later it did his bidding. Let that be the last word on the deep places of the castle, and let us climb back up now, toward the light, and follow the long, strange roads of the four objects the founders left behind. The four objects went four ways after their makers died, and the roads they travelled are long and tangled, and run all the way down to the present, and to follow them fully would take many nights of their own. But it is worth tracing the shape of each one in the quiet, because the afterlives of these four things say something about the four founders that nothing else quite captures. Godric's sword had the strangest fate of the four, and in some ways the kindest, because it never truly belonged to anyone after him, in the way the others did. It was made to be his, but it was made, too, with a stubborn loyalty to his idea of courage, and across the long centuries it kept that loyalty in a way that is almost alive. The sword has a habit of presenting itself, out of nowhere, to a true child of Gryffindor, in a moment of real need. It does not stay in a vault gathering dust. It does not pass quietly down a family line as an heirloom. It vanishes for long stretches, and then appears, in the hand of someone worthy, exactly when the worst danger is closest, as if Godric's own protective instinct had been forged into the metal, and goes on guarding the brave, long after the brave man himself is gone. The sword also kept the old quarrel alive, the goblins insisting down the centuries that the work had always been theirs, and only lent, never given, a dispute over who truly owned the blade that would flare up again and cause real trouble far down the years. And it drank, as such blades do, taking into itself only that which made it stronger, so that across its 1,000 years it absorbed terrible things and came out harder and deadlier for them, a weapon that could in time destroy horrors that almost nothing else could touch. Of the four relics, Godric's is the only one that seems to have kept faith with its maker, going on doing exactly what he would have wanted, protecting the courageous, for 1,000 years. Helga's cup did not fare so gently, and there is a sorrow in its road that suits the gentlest founder least of all. The cup passed, after her death, down through the long generations, and at some point it came into the hands of a descendant of Helga's own bloodline, a woman who treasured it as a relic of her famous ancestor, and kept it among her hoard of precious things. And there, in the home of that descendant, the cup was stolen, taken by someone who murdered to get it, a charming and ambitious young person who coveted the founder's relics and was willing to kill for them. And once stolen, Helga's cup, the gentle vessel of the gentlest of the four, was taken away into the dark and hidden in one of the most heavily guarded places in the entire magical world, a deep vault sunk beneath the earth and protected by terrible enchantments, where it sat for a long age, as the prize of someone who cared nothing for Helga or for anything she had ever stood for. The cup that the kindest founder made, the badger-marked treasure of the woman who never turned a child away, ended up stolen by a murderer and locked in a vault as a trophy of cruelty. It is hard to imagine a fate Helga would have wanted less, and harder still to think that the warmest of the four left behind an object that travelled the coldest road of any of them. Rowena's diadem we have already followed into the forest, but its road did not end there. It lay in the hollow of its tree for 1,000 years, lost, and then it was found, by the wrong person, drawn out of the wood, by someone who had won its hiding place from Helena's ghost. And what was done with it then is the bitterest part. The diadem, Rowena's masterwork, her circlet of wisdom, the deepest expression of her belief that intelligence was the greatest treasure a person could hold, was turned to a purpose of pure darkness, made into an instrument of a kind of magic so terrible that it is barely spoken of, and then hidden away again, this time inside the castle itself, tucked into a hidden room among 1,000 years of other lost and forgotten things, a room so full of the castle's accumulated secrets that one more hidden object could lie there unnoticed for decades. Rowena's treasure came home, in the end, to the school she had helped to build, but it came home corrupted, a thing of wisdom turned into a thing of horror, and it sat hidden in the heart of her own castle until it was finally destroyed in fire during the worst night the school ever knew. The cleverest founder's cleverest creation became, at the last, a vessel of the very darkness she would have most despised, and was burned to nothing within the walls she had raised. There is no kindness in that road at all. It is grief upon grief. The daughter, the diadem, the corruption, the fire, every part of it a wound. And Salazar's locket went the way he would have wanted, which is the most chilling thing about it. Unlike the cup and the diadem, lost by theft and accident, Salazar's locket passed down his own bloodline exactly as he intended, handed from descendant to descendant as the proof of their descent from him, the serpent-marked treasure of a family that clung to its connection to the great Slytherin as the one glory it had left. Down the centuries that family declined, growing poorer and stranger and more isolated, marrying among itself, hoarding its few relics, nursing its pride in a heritage that brought it nothing but a name and a gift for speaking to snakes. And the locket went with them, down and down the line, until at last it came to the generation that would produce Salazar's heir, the descendant who carried his gift and would one day open his chamber. The locket changed hands once more after that, sold in desperation, bought by a collector, stolen by the same ambitious young murderer who took Helga's cup, and turned, like the diadem, to the darkest of purposes, and hidden in a place of horror to guard it. But the heart of the locket's road is that it reached its destination. It came down Salazar's blood to Salazar's heir, just as he had planned, the only one of the four relics whose journey went according to its maker's design, because Salazar was the only one of the four who built his plans to outlast him on purpose. Even in the fate of the four objects, you can read the four founders. Godric's blade kept faith with courage. Helga's cup was lost to cruelty. Rowena's diadem was corrupted by grief and ambition. And Salazar's locket did exactly what he meant it to do, 1,000 years after he was gone, because the coldest of the four was the only one who ever truly planned that far ahead. There is a kind of loss in this story that has no object attached to it at all, no relic, no chamber, no grave, and it may in the end be the largest loss of the four founders, though it is the quietest. When the four of them died, an enormous amount of magic died with them, knowledge that lived only in their heads and their hands and was never properly written down, and the magical world has been poorer for it ever since without even fully knowing what it lost. Each of the four was a master of things that few others of their age could do, and each of them taught only a portion of what they knew. A teacher passes on what can be passed on in the years available to the students able to receive it, and always there is more in the master than ever reaches the pupil. The deepest, strangest, most personal magic of a great witch or wizard often cannot be taught at all, or can be taught only to a rare student over a lifetime, and when the master dies before that transfer is complete, the magic simply ends. It goes out of the world, and the four founders were four of the greatest magical practitioners their world ever produced, which means that 4 times over, when each of them died, a body of knowledge that had no equal anywhere was extinguished, much of it forever. Think of what went with Helga. We have spoken of her domestic magic, her charms of food and sustenance and healing, the deep practical enchantments of keeping a vast household of children fed and well and whole. That branch of magic was looked down on in her age, dismissed as women's work, as kitchen craft, beneath the notice of the grand wizards who concerned themselves with loftier things. Helga elevated it into something genuinely powerful, and she understood it better than anyone of her time, and a great deal of what she knew she never recorded, because the world around her did not value it enough to ask her to. When she died, the fullness of her healing arts and her sustaining magic thinned away into fragments and half-remembered methods, and we will never know how much was lost, because no one thought to write it down, because the people who might have written it down did not think it mattered. The gentlest founder's deepest gift was allowed to fade because the world was too proud to record it, and that is a loss that compounds the injustice of her whole reputation. Think of what went with Rowena. She was the greatest mind of the age, a witch who mapped magic no one before her had mapped and solved problems the wisest had abandoned, and her diadem alone tells you the level she operated at, an object that could sharpen the very wisdom of whoever wore it. a feat of enchantment beyond almost anything else in the magical world. How much of what Rowena understood ever passed to another living person? Some, surely. She was a teacher, and she taught, and the curious children of her house carried something of her forward. But the deepest reaches of her thought, the magic at the far edge of what she alone could do, the understanding that let her build a castle that breaks geometry and enchant a circlet that enhances the mind, how much of that died in the glen-bred genius when grief finally killed her? A great deal, almost certainly. The cleverest person of the age took most of her cleverness with her, and the world has never produced her equal since, and the things she knew that no one else could grasp are simply gone. Think of what went with Salazar, and here the loss is more troubling, because some of what Salazar knew was knowledge the world might be better without, and yet it was knowledge all the same. He was a master of the darker and more secret branches of magic, the hidden arts, the dangerous workings, and the very fact that he could create and seal a basilisk beneath a castle tells you he had walked into places of magic that most witches and wizards never approached. Much of that died with him too, or went underground into the hands of those who sought such things, scattered and corrupted and incomplete. The darkest founder's darkest knowledge did not vanish cleanly. Some of it leaked out into the worst corners of the magical world to do harm down the centuries. But the full shape of what Salazar understood, the architecture of his secret magic, went with him into his unknown grave, and what remains is only the broken and dangerous edges of it. And think of what went with Godric, the warrior, the master of combat magic and the magic of protection. He warded a castle so thoroughly that its defenses have held for 1,000 years against every assault. He was, by every account, a formidable fighter, a duelist of the first rank, a wizard who could meet violence with violence and win. That kind of magic, the magic of battle and defense and the protection of a place and its people, was Godric's mastery, and like the others he could only teach a portion of it, and the deepest of it, the instinct and the art that made him what he was, died with him on the field or in the bed, or wherever his unrecorded death finally took him. The magical world lost one of its greatest protectors, and most of what he knew about protection in the same stroke. 4 masters, 4 bodies of unequaled knowledge, 4 deaths, and 4 times the world grew quietly poorer, losing things it could not replace, and in some cases, did not even know it had. We tend, looking back at the founders, to mourn the friendship that broke, and the secrets that were hidden, and the relics that were lost. But there is this larger grief underneath all of it, the grief of knowledge itself dying, of 4 extraordinary minds, going dark, and taking with them magic that no one has ever recovered. The castle still stands, the houses still bear their names, but the 4 people who knew the most about magic that their world had ever known are gone, and most of what they knew is gone with them, and that loss does not announce itself the way a broken friendship or a hidden monster does. It is just an absence, a thinning, a sense that the magical world was once capable of more than it is now, in the days when 4 such people walked the same halls and knew the things they knew. The deepest secret the founders took to their graves may simply be the full measure of what they could do, which no one living will ever know again. There is one more absence to sit with before we turn, at last, toward the light, and it is the strangest of all. 4 of the most famous witches and wizards who ever lived, 4 people whose names 1,000 years of children have spoken every single day, 4 founders of the most renowned school in the magical world, and not one of them has a grave that anyone can find. Not one tomb, not one marked resting place. 4 of the most remembered people in all of magical history vanished, in death, without a trace, and the mystery of where the founders lie has never been solved. Consider how odd that is. We are not speaking of obscure people lost to time. We are speaking of the 4 whose names are carved into the daily life of the school they built, whose colors fly in every great hall feast, whose values are spoken aloud over every child who is sorted. If anyone in the magical world deserved a great tomb, a monument, a place of pilgrimage where the grateful could come and stand and remember, it was these 4. And yet there is nothing. Godric Gryffindor lies somewhere unknown. Helga Hufflepuff lies somewhere unknown. Rowena Ravenclaw, who died of grief, lies somewhere unknown. Salazar Slytherin, who left into the night and died far away, lies somewhere unknown. 4 graves, 4 unmarked and unfound resting places, scattered no one knows where, across 1,000 years of forgetting. Why? The records do not say, and so we are left with guesses, and the guesses themselves tell a kind of story. Perhaps it was the age they lived in, a hard and dangerous time when even the greatest were buried quickly and quietly, and the markers did not survive. Perhaps it was deliberate, a choice each of them made, or that was made for them, to lie in secret rather than in state. For Godric, who left the quietest grave of any loud man, one can imagine a deliberate plainness, a refusal of monument, the same directness that ran through his whole life carried into his death. For Salazar, secrecy was the air he breathed, and a hidden grave suits the man who hid everything else, who would have wanted, perhaps, to lie concealed as he had lived concealed. For Rowena, broken by grief, perhaps there was no one left who cared enough to mark the spot, her daughter dead in a foreign forest, her masterwork lost, her heart given out, buried by whoever was left with whatever care they had. And for Helga, the peacemaker, the one who never sought recognition in life, perhaps an unmarked grave is the truest monument of all, the woman who asked for nothing, asking for nothing even in death. But these are only guesses, and the truth is that we do not know, and the not knowing is itself one of the most haunting facts in the whole history of the founders. The school they built is the most visited and best known place in their world. The people who built it have disappeared so completely that no one can point to where they lie. There is a strange justice and a strange cruelty in that, both at once. The work survives, the workers are lost. The castle stands and fills with children every year, and the 4 who raised it out of bare rock are nowhere, their bodies scattered to 4 unknown corners of the earth, their graves swallowed by the same long silence that swallowed so many of their secrets. And maybe that is fitting, in a way that is hard to put into words. The founders did not build monuments to themselves. They built a refuge for frightened children, and then they argued, and broke, and died, and disappeared. And the thing they left behind was not 4 tombs but one castle, full of life, going on without them. If you wanted to stand somewhere and remember Godric Gryffindor, you would not go to a grave, because there is none to go to. You would go to the school. You would stand in the great hall under the floating candles and the enchanted ceiling, among the 4 long tables and the children laughing at them, and you would understand that this, the living school, is where the founders actually are, not in any grave, but in every stone of the place they made, and every child it has ever kept safe. The 4 of them have no tombs because they did not need them. They built something better to be remembered by, and 1,000 years later it is still standing, and still full, and still doing the one thing they all agreed on before everything else fell apart. So far this has been, in the main, a story of sorrow, and that is honest, because the lives of the 4 founders ended in loss and silence and things hidden in the dark. But it would be a false telling to leave it there, because alongside all the grief, there is something else in this story that is just as true, and it is worth holding on to as the night deepens. The 4 of them built something that worked. Not perfectly, not without a terrible cost, but truly and lastingly, and the good of it has gone on and on for 1,000 years, far outweighing, in the end, the wreck of their friendship. Let us spend a little while in that, because it is the warmest part of the whole history, and you should have something warm to hold as you drift towards sleep. Remember the world before the school. Remember the frightened, scattered children, the magic dying in isolated heads, the families living in dread of the mob, the gifted young hunted and broken and lost for want of anywhere safe to grow. That was the world the 4 founders were born into, and it was the ordinary state of things, the way it had always been, and the way it might have gone on being for centuries more. And then 4 people decided it did not have to be that way, and they built a castle, and after they built it, nothing was ever quite the same again. Because the school did not just save the children who came to it, though it saved a great many of those, it changed the entire shape of the magical world. Before Hogwarts, magical education was a matter of luck, of finding a master, of surviving long enough to teach yourself. After Hogwarts, there was a place, a real and permanent institution, where the knowledge could be gathered and kept and handed down properly, generation after generation, instead of dying out and being painfully rediscovered over and over. The 4 founders broke the cycle of waste that had crippled magic for as long as anyone could remember. They built a vessel that could carry knowledge forward through time, and once that vessel existed, magic could accumulate instead of merely surviving, could build on itself, could be passed whole from one century to the next. Almost everything the magical world became, it became because four people gave it a place to keep and grow its knowledge, and that place has never closed in 1,000 years. And the idea spread. Hogwarts was the first true school of magic in its part of the world, but it was so plainly a good idea, so obviously the answer to a problem everyone had, that others followed. Schools of magic rose in other lands, modelled on what the four founders had proven could be done, until the gathering and teaching of magical children became, across much of the world, the normal and expected thing, rather than the desperate exception. The four founders did not just build a school, they invented the very notion of the magical school, and that notion outgrew them, and outgrew their castle, and spread across the earth, so that 1,000 years later, magical children in many countries grow up, expecting to be taught, expecting to be safe, expecting a place to belong, and that expectation, which would have seemed an impossible dream in the founder's own frightened age, traces back to four people and one castle in the Scottish hills. The castle itself endured everything. 1,000 years is a very long time, and it was not a peaceful 1,000 years. The school passed through dark ages and dangerous ones, through wars and upheavals, through the slow building of the wall of secrecy that finally separated the magical world from the ordinary one, through the rise and fall of dark wizards who would have torn it down, through every kind of trouble 1,000 years can throw at a place. And it held. The protections Godric laid into its foundations held. The warmth Helga built into its kitchens and common rooms held. The cleverness Rowena worked into its shifting halls held. Even the deep places Salazar made held, though they held a horror as well as a strength. Generation after generation of children passed through the great doors, were sorted under the founder's own enchanted hat, grew up safe behind the founder's own walls, and went out into the world carrying what the school had given them, and then sent their own children back in their turn. 1,000 years of that. 1,000 years of frightened 11-year-olds arriving cold and homesick, and finding, in the place four long-dead people built, somewhere they were meant to be. Count the lives, if you can, though you cannot. 1,000 years of students, generation upon generation, each one a child who might, in the world before the school, have been hunted or broken or simply lost, and who instead was kept safe and taught and sent on whole. The number is beyond reckoning. Every one of them owes something to four people they never met, who argued themselves to ruin and died without graves 1,000 years before those children were born. The good the four founders did is not a thing of the past. It is happening right now, tonight, in a castle full of sleeping children who have never heard the full story of the four whose names they wear, and it will go on happening long after all of us listening tonight are gone. That is the answer to all the sorrow. The friendship broke, yes. The secrets were terrible, yes. The relics were lost, and the graves were never found, and the knowledge died, yes. All of it. And still, the thing they built has sheltered more frightened children than anyone could ever count, for 1,000 years, and is sheltering them still. Whatever else is true of the four founders, that is true too, and it is the larger truth, and it is the one to fall asleep on. They could not hold their friendship together, but they held the castle together long enough to finish it, and the castle has held everyone else together ever since. For four people who ended so badly, that is not a small redemption. It might be the only kind of redemption that a story this sad allows. They failed each other, completely and forever, and they did not fail the children, not once, not in 1,000 years. There is one object left to speak of properly, and it is the most important of all, because it is the only thing the four founders ever made together that is still doing its work, openly, in plain sight, every single year. The sorting hat. We met it earlier, the battered old pointed hat that was once Godric's own, the hat the four of them poured their gathered minds into, so that it could keep choosing the school's children long after they were dead. But there is more to say about it now that we know the whole story, because the hat is not only a clever piece of magic, it is, in a strange and moving way, the four founders themselves, still present, still cooperating, still trying, 1,000 years on, to do right by the children of the school they broke their friendship to build. Every year, the hat sorts the new students, as it has done for 1,000 years, and when it does, all four founders are in some real sense at work in it. Godric's eye for courage, Helga's eye for loyalty and worth, Rowena's eye for a quick mind, Salazar's eye for cunning and ambition. The four of them, who could not stay in the same school together in life, are bound together forever in the felt and brim of that old hat. Their judgments mingled, their values balanced against one another, choosing each child as the four of them once chose by hand. Whatever drove them apart in life, the hat is the four of them still in agreement, still doing the one job they all believed in, the placing of each child where that child will best grow. It is the last and longest lasting act of their fellowship, and it happens fresh every autumn, and the children it sorts have no idea that the hat dropping over their eyes is, in a sense, all four founders looking out at them together one more time. And the hat does something else, something that very few of the children who wear it ever fully understand. It sings. Before the sorting, the hat sings a song, a new one each year, and across the long centuries those songs became more than a charming ceremony. They became, again and again, a warning. Because the hat, holding the gathered minds of all four founders, knows the whole story. It knows how the four of them began in friendship and ended in ruin. It knows what the division between the houses cost, and where it came from, and what it could cost again. And so, year after year, century after century, the hat has used its songs to tell the children the truth about the four who made it, and to beg them, in times of danger especially, not to repeat the founder's mistake. Sit with the strangeness of that for a moment, because it is one of the most quietly heartbreaking things in the whole history of the school. The four founders broke apart over the question of who belonged and what the school should be. Their division hardened into the rivalry of the houses and ran down 1,000 years. And the one thing the four of them left behind that can still speak, their own last joint creation, spends its voice pleading with the children not to do what the founders did. The hat sings of the four houses standing together. It sings of the danger of division, of a school turned against itself, of what happens when the four kinds of children forget that they were always meant to be one school under one roof. It warns, in the years when shadows gather, that the school will only survive if the houses hold together, that the old quarrel that split the founders must not be allowed to split their children when the real danger comes from outside. The founders failed to heed that lesson themselves. They tore their own fellowship apart, and their hat has spent 1,000 years trying to make sure the children do better than the four people who made it. It is the founders apologizing, in a way, across the centuries. Not in words of apology, the hat does not say sorry, but in the deepest sense of the thing. Four people who could not hold together built a device to keep choosing their children fairly, and that device, carrying their own gathered wisdom and their own hard-learned grief, turns every year to the children and says, in effect, learn from us, do not become us, hold together where we came apart. The bravest, the kindest, the cleverest, and the most cunning of an age, who failed each other completely, left behind a voice that begs the next 1,000 years of children to succeed where they failed. There is more love in that than in any monument. The founders could not save their own friendship, but they made certain that their own last creation would spend forever urging the children to save theirs. And here is the part that should sit warmest of all as you drift down toward sleep. It works, often enough. The houses do hold together, in the end, when it matters most. 1,000 years of children have heard the hat's warning, and in the darkest hours of the school's history, when everything was truly at stake, the four houses have set aside the old rivalry and stood as one, the lion and the badger and the eagle and the serpent together, defending the castle the founders built against the dark that would have destroyed it. In those moments, the founders' deepest wish came true, after all. 1,000 years too late for the four of them, but right on time for the children. The four houses, united, defending the school, is the thing Godric and Helga and Rowena and Salazar could never quite manage to be themselves. Four parts of one whole, holding together against the dark. The hat has been asking for it for 1,000 years, and every so often, when it counts, the children give it. Picture the moment itself, the moment that has happened to every single witch and wizard who ever passed through the school. 1,000 years of children, all sharing this one experience, across all that time. A new student, 11 years old, far from home, stands in a great stone hall full of candlelight and watching faces, and waits for a name to be called. The hall is the same hall the founders raised. The ceiling overhead shows the same night sky it has always shown, and when the child's name is called, the child walks up to a simple wooden stool, and an old pointed hat is placed upon their head, and the hat slips down over their eyes, and for a moment the whole world goes dark and quiet, and there is only the child and the voice of the hat, which is the voice of the four founders, reading them. What the hat does in that moment is what the founders once did by hand. It looks into the child, it weighs what is there, the courage and the loyalty and the cleverness and the cunning, the fear and the hope and the hidden shape of who this small person is and might become. And then it chooses, and it speaks the name of a house aloud, and with that single word the child is claimed, for the rest of their life, by one of four people who have been dead for 1,000 years. To be sorted into Gryffindor is to be claimed by Godric, told that the hat saw in you the courage he prized above everything. To be sorted into Hufflepuff is to be claimed by Helga, told that you belong with the loyal and the true and the hard-working, the children she would never turn away. To be sorted into Ravenclaw is to be claimed by Rowena, told that your mind is the thing that marks you, that you belong among the curious and the quick. And to be sorted into Slytherin is to be claimed by Salazar, told that the hat saw ambition in you, and cunning, and the hunger to be great. 1,000 years of children, each one claimed in that moment by one of the four, each one folded into a house that carries a dead founder's name, and colours and values, each one taking on, a little, the character of the founder who claimed them. That is the truest monument the four of them have, and it is a living one. Not stone, not a tomb, not an object in a vault, but people. Generation after generation of living children who carry forward the four temperaments of the four founders into every age. Godric is not only a name on a banner, he is in every brave child who was ever sorted into his house and grew up prizing courage because of it. Helga is in every loyal and patient soul who found a home in hers. Rowena lives in 1,000 years of clever, curious minds, and Salazar, for better and for worse, in 1,000 years of the ambitious and the cunning. The founders did not leave statues to be remembered by, they left kinds of people, and those kinds of people are still being made, every autumn, under their own enchanted hat, in the hall they built. And the four houses, taken together, are the founders' real argument finally laid to rest, or at least held in a kind of balance the founders themselves could never manage, because the school needs all four. It always did. A school of nothing but the brave would be reckless and quarrelsome. A school of nothing but the clever would be cold and proud. A school of nothing but the loyal would be gentle, but perhaps too soft for a hard world. And a school of nothing but the ambitious would devour itself. The four kinds of children balance one another, temper one another, need one another, and the school is whole, precisely because it contains all four. The founders fought over which qualities mattered most, and the answer the centuries gave is that they all do, that the courage and the loyalty and the cleverness and the cunning are all necessary, that a complete world needs every one of the four temperaments the founders embodied. The four of them could not see it, locked in their quarrel, but the school they built has been quietly proving it for 1,000 years. Every year, every sorting, four houses under one roof, four founders held forever in balance by the children who wear their names. Even Salazar belongs in that balance, and this is worth saying clearly, in the dark, where hard things can be said gently. Salazar did a terrible thing, and we have not softened it, but the quality he prized, the ambition, the cunning, the resourcefulness, the hunger to be great, that quality is not in itself evil, and a world without it would be a poorer and weaker world. Salazar's house has produced its share of dark wizards, yes. It has also produced brave and brilliant and honourable people, generation after generation, who carried his prized qualities and used them well. The fault was never in the ambition. The fault was in what Salazar let his fear do to it, the way he turned a strength into a doctrine of exclusion and hatred. The quality itself, held in balance with the other three, is part of what makes the school and the world complete. Even the darkest founder left behind something the world genuinely needs, and 1,000 years of his house, at its best, has shown what that something can be when it is not poisoned by fear. The hat knew that. It still sorts children into Slytherin every year, because the world still needs what Salazar prized, even though the world is still learning, 1,000 years on, how to hold that quality without letting it curdle the way it curdled in the man himself. Here is a curious thing to consider. Lying in the dark, having spent these hours with the four of them, almost no one knows the founders the way we have come to know them tonight. To most of the witches and wizards who have ever lived, the four founders are not people at all. They are names on house banners. They are colors, scarlet and yellow and blue and green. They are a lion and a badger and an eagle and a serpent stitched onto a crest. They are the four words a child hears in the sorting, and the four common rooms scattered through the castle. And beyond that, to most people, they are barely real. Four ancient figures so worn smooth by 1,000 years of legend that nothing human is left of them. Think about how little survives, truly, of who they were. We have spent hours on their inner lives, their fears, and their loves, and the secrets they carried. But most of what we have is reconstruction, inference, the shape of people glimpsed through 1,000 years of fog. The founders left almost no record of themselves in their own words. They did not write memoirs. They did not leave letters that survive. The four of them, who knew more about magic than anyone of their age, were strangely silent about their own hearts, and so the personal truth of them, the daily texture of their friendship and their falling out, the actual sound of their voices, and the actual feel of being in a room with them, all of that is simply gone. We have the deeds and the relics, and the broad shape of the story. The people themselves slipped away into legend, and legend is a flattening thing. It takes a complicated, suffering human being and turns them into a symbol, a virtue, a color on a flag, and 1,000 years of children grow up saluting the symbol without ever knowing there was a person underneath. The school keeps their memory, after a fashion, but even the school remembers them more as institutions than as people. There are portraits in the castle, paintings of the four that hang in their places of honor, and in the magical world a portrait is more than a picture. It can move and speak, and carry an echo of the person it shows. But a portrait is only ever a shadow of the one who sat for it, a sketch of a personality rather than the living soul. And a portrait painted to honor a founder shows the founder as they wish to be remembered, the dignified public face, not the private grief or the secret shame. The Godric in a portrait is the brave Godric, not the Godric mourning the brother he lost. The Rowena in a portrait is the wise Rowena, not the mother dying of a broken heart. The portraits keep the legend, not the truth, and the truth, the real and aching human truth of the four of them, was buried with them in their four unknown graves. In the whole castle, there are really only two beings left who remember the founders as anything like real people. And they are not paintings or names or banners. They are the two ghosts. The Grey Lady, who was Rowena's own daughter, who knew her mother as a living woman, who remembers the real Rowena, and not the legend. And the Bloody Baron, who lived in the founder's own age, who walked the castle when it was new, and the four of them still walked it too. Those two carry an actual memory of the founders, that no portrait and no record can match. The memory of people they actually knew, and both of them are silent. The Grey Lady will not speak of it, locked in her 1,000-year shame. The Baron will not speak of anything, dragging his chains through his 1,000-year penance. The only two witnesses left who truly remember the founders, as people have both been struck dumb by grief and guilt, and so even the living memory of the four of them drifts the halls in silence, century after century, never sharing what it knows. Which means that you, tonight, lying here in the dark on the edge of sleep, may have spent more time with the four founders as actual human beings, with their fears and their loves and their failures, than almost anyone who has lived in the 1,000 years since they died. Most people get the banner and the color and the crest. You got the people, the brave man who lost his friend and could not say so, the kind woman who held everyone together and kept their secrets out of love, the brilliant woman undone by the heart of her own child, the cunning man whose fear curdled into 1,000-year horror, and who was, beneath all of it, once a frightened magical child himself, surviving the only way he knew how. They were not symbols, they were four people, as real and as flawed and as full of sorrow as anyone, and the legend that swallowed them did them the small injustice of making them simpler than they were. Tonight, at least, in this one quiet telling, they got to be complicated again. They got to be human. That is its own small kindness to four people who have been flat heraldic shapes for 1,000 years, and it is a good thing to have done for them before we let them go. We have followed the breaking of the four mostly through one friendship, the bond between Godric and Salazar, because that was the strand whose snapping did the most damage. But the founding was never only a single friendship. Four people who make something together are not four people standing in a line. They are a web. Every one of them is tied to every other, six separate bonds among the four of them, each its own particular thing. And to understand how completely the fellowship came apart, you have to see the whole web, and not only the one strand that broke first. Take Rowena and Salazar, the two coldest and most private of the four, the two who lived most inside their own heads. There was an understanding between them that the others did not quite share, the recognition of one careful mind by another. Rowena was the only person in the castle who could meet Salazar, argument for argument, follow his reasoning all the way down to its root, and see precisely where it went wrong. That is a particular kind of closeness, the closeness of two people who can truly debate, who take each other seriously enough to disagree with exactness. It may even be that Rowena, the great rationalist, was the one most able to feel the pull of Salazar's grim logic, to understand why a careful person might come to fear the children of a hostile world, even as her own better judgment recoiled from what he wanted to do about that fear. She did not hate him, she understood him, which is harder, and which made his fall more painful to watch, because she could see the exact steps by which a reasonable caution curdled into an unreasonable cruelty, and she could not stop him taking a single one of them. Helga and Salazar were the hardest pairing of all, the open hand and the closed one, and Helga was the one who never gave up on him. Where Godric met Salazar's hardening with frustration, and Rowena met it with cold, clear understanding, Helga met it with the stubborn refusal to stop caring that ran through her whole nature. She had built her life on the principle that no one should be written off, and she would not write off Salazar, even as he became the very thing she least understood, a man who wanted to turn children away. One can imagine her trying, over and over, to reach him, to remind him of the frightened magical child he had once been, to call him back from the edge he was walking toward, and one can imagine her failing, and grieving the failure in silence, because the gentlest of the four would have felt the loss of Salazar not as the removal of an enemy, but as the abandonment of a friend she could not save. Of all four, Helga may have mourned him the most, and the most quietly. Godric and Rowena were the warrior and the scholar, and there was friction between them of the ordinary, healthy kind, the friction between a person who wants to act and a person who wants to understand first. Godric's instinct was to move, to do, to meet the thing head-on. Rowena's was to stop, to think, to map the whole problem before laying a finger on it. Each could have found the other maddening, and surely sometimes did, but each also gave the other something they lacked. Rowena's caution slowed Godric's recklessness. Godric's decisiveness cut clean through Rowena's endless analysis when something simply had to be done that hour. And on the one great question, the openness of the school, the two of them stood firmly together, both on the side of welcoming every child, which mattered enormously, because it meant the quarrel was never one founder against three, it was a true division straight down the middle of the four. Godric and Helga were the easiest of the six bonds, and the warmest. They were the two protectors, the two whose very first instinct was the safety of the children, and at bottom they wanted the same thing. Godric protected with his courage and his blade, standing between the hunted and the danger. Helga protected with her warmth and her patience, making certain that once a child was safe, that child was also held, the fierce half of protection and the tender half, aimed at the same end, working in easy harmony. If there was one unshakable alliance among the four, it was this one, and it held all the way to the end. And Rowena and Helga, the brilliant and the kind, had a bond that is easy to overlook and worth pausing on, because it was a meeting of two different kinds of wisdom. Rowena carried the wisdom of the mind, the sharp, clear grasp of how things work. Helga carried the wisdom of the heart, the deep understanding of people, of what they need, and how to hold them. Two very different gifts, and the clever are not always wise enough to honor a kind of wisdom unlike their own. But every sign says that Rowena did honor Helga, that the cleverest of the four understood Helga's patient warmth to be its own form of genius, harder to measure than cleverness and no less real. The high, cold mind and the deep, warm heart, each holding half of what it means to truly understand another person, and between the two of them, perhaps, the most complete wisdom any of the four possessed. Six bonds, then, among the four, and the whole founding stood balanced on all six. When the central strand snapped, when Godric and Salazar finally broke, every other bond in the web felt the wrench. Rowena lost the one mind she could fully debate. Helga lost the friend she had refused to abandon. The alliance of Godric and Helga hardened into the surviving heart of the school, and the bond of Godric and Rowena, and the bond of Rowena and Helga, became the three-cornered thing that carried the castle forward after the fourth corner walked away into the night. A web of four can survive the loss of one strand. It cannot survive it without strain, and the strain of losing Salazar ran through every bond that remained, quietly reshaping the friendship of the three who were left to go on without him. There is another way to see the quarrel that broke them, and it cuts deeper than the question of whom to let in. Underneath the argument about admissions lay a larger disagreement that the four of them may never have fully put into words, a disagreement about what the school was even for. Each of the four had helped to build the same castle, but each of them, in their heart, had built it for a different reason, and carried a different idea of what it was meant to be. And those four ideas could sit peacefully side by side, while all was going well, and could grind against one another the moment things went wrong. To Godric, the school was a refuge and a stronghold. He had spent his whole life standing between the hunted and the hunters, and the castle was the grandest possible version of that stand, a fortress where the children he had always shielded one at a time could be shielded all together, behind walls no mob could ever breach. The point of the school, to Godric, was safety, the plain physical safety of magical children in a world that wanted them dead, and everything else came second to that. A child in danger got in. That was the whole of it. The school was a wall thrown up around the vulnerable, and a wall does not stop to ask who deserves to be standing behind it. To Helga, the school was a home, and the children were, in a real and serious sense, a family. She had not built a fortress, she had built a hearth. The point of the school, to her, was belonging, the deep and ordinary human need of a child to have somewhere they are wanted, and someone who is glad that they exist. Safety was necessary, but it was not enough. A child needed to be safe, yes, and also fed, and also comforted, and also made to feel that this vast cold stone building was, somehow, home. Helga's idea of the school was the warmest of the four, and in some ways the most demanding, because a home asks far more than a fortress does. A fortress only has to hold. A home has to care, every day, for everyone inside it. To Rowena, the school was something nearer to a temple, a place given over to learning for its own sake, where the great slow work of understanding magic could at last be gathered up and carried forward, instead of dying out and being painfully found again. The point of the school, to her, was knowledge, the keeping and growing and handing on of everything the magical world knew and might yet come to know. The children mattered to her too, but they mattered partly as the minds who would carry the knowledge onward, the next link in an endless chain of understanding, reaching forward through the centuries. Rowena had built an academy, a place of study and rigor and the disciplined pursuit of the mind, and the strange clever architecture she gave the castle, all its puzzles and its shifting halls, was her attempt to turn the very building into a teacher. And to Salazar, the school was an inheritance, a guarded line, a brotherhood of the worthy, meant to carry his kind of magic and his kind of people forward through time, kept select, kept apart, kept safe from the contamination he had taught himself to fear. The point of the school, to him, was continuity, the survival of one particular magical heritage passed down through carefully chosen successors. His was the narrowest of the four ideas, and the one the centuries would decisively reject. But it had a dark coherence of its own. He was not, in his own mind, building a place to shelter all the world's magical children. He was building a place to preserve a line of the gifted, and from that starting point, the shutting out of the children of ordinary parents was not cruelty at all, but simple consistency. The other three had built a school for everyone. Salazar had built one for a chosen few, and given it the same walls and the same name. Laid out plainly like this, you can see why the quarrel could never be settled by meeting in the middle. It looked like an argument about admissions, a single matter of policy, the sort of thing reasonable people might split the difference on and move past. It was really four different answers to the question of what the whole enterprise was for, and answers like that cannot be split. A refuge takes in the endangered. A home takes in the ones who need belonging. A temple of the mind takes in the ones who can learn. And a guarded line takes in only the chosen blood. Three of those four ideas, however different from one another, all pointed the same direction, toward openness, toward taking in every child who came. One pointed the opposite way. So the four of them were not, in the end, arguing over a rule. They were arguing over the soul of the thing they had made together. And on the soul of a thing, there is no halfway house. The school that survived is all three of the first visions at once, and 1,000 years on you can still feel every one of them in the place. It is Godric's refuge, safe behind its old unbreached walls. It is Helga's home, warm, and a family of sorts to every child it gathers in. And it is Rowena's temple of learning, still keeping and growing and handing on the knowledge of the magical world. Three founders' visions, woven together into one living school, holding. Salazar's was the vision that did not survive, the guarded line, the chosen blood, and the centuries were right to let it fall away, even though his house remains, carrying the quality he prized, without the cruelty he wrapped so tightly around it. The school is, in the end, the thing the other three built, and it is far the better for having refused the fourth one's narrower dream. If you set the four of them side by side now, at the end, and look at what each one carried into the ground, a single thread runs through all four that is easy to miss when you take them one at a time. Every one of the founders, in the end, chose silence, each for a different reason, out of a different wound, but the choice was the same choice 4 times over, and it may be the deepest thing the four of them had in common, deeper than the school, deeper than the magic, deeper than the quarrel that drove them apart. They were four people who, faced with the hardest truths of their own lives, decided to say nothing. Godric chose silence out of pride and grief. He had lost the friend who meant the most to him, and he knew his own stubbornness had helped to lose him, and a man like Godric does not speak of such things. So he carried the loss without a word, and took it to his unmarked grave, and the world remembers him as simply brave, never knowing the sorrow the bravery was covering. Helga chose silence out of love. She knew the whole inside truth of how the fellowship failed, every private moment of it, because she was the one who stood in the middle, trying to hold it together. And she could not bring herself to set down a record of her friends at their worst, could not betray them even after they had broken her heart. And so the one person who could have told us everything chose, out of tenderness, to tell us nothing. Rowena chose silence too, though hers was the cruelest kind, because hers was not entirely a choice. She died inside a not knowing, the truth of her daughter kept from her by the very tragedy that made it, and so the silence she carried was a silence forced on her, a question she took to her grave, because no one ever brought her the answer. The cleverest woman of the age went into the dark with the one thing she most wanted to understand, locked away from her forever. And Salazar chose silence, out of fear, hardened into malice. His was the most deliberate silence of the four, the silence of a man hiding a chamber, and a monster from the people who trusted him most, keeping his terrible secret behind a calm face for years, building his 1,000-year weapon in the dark, while his friends worked in the light. He took his secret to the grave the way he had carried it in life, sealed, concealed, deliberate, and he counted on the silence holding long enough for his design to come true. It did. 4 people, 4 silences, 4 secrets carried down into 4 graves no one can find. And here is the thought to hold, the one that gathers the whole long story into a single quiet point. The founders built a school to gather and keep and pass on knowledge, to break the old cycle of things being lost because no one wrote them down, to make sure that what one generation knew the next generation would know too. That was the whole idea. That was the thing they gave their lives to. And then, in their own most personal matters, the 4 of them did the exact opposite. They hid, they withheld, they let the most important truths of their own lives die with them, unspoken, unrecorded, lost in the same way. All that scattered magic had been lost before they built the school to save it. The 4 who taught the world to keep its knowledge could not bring themselves to share their own. They built a vessel to carry the truth forward through time, and then they kept their own truths out of it, and so the founders themselves became the very thing their school was built to prevent. Knowledge lost, understanding gone dark, a truth that died because no one would speak it. There is a sad music in that, and it is worth hearing. The keepers of knowledge were, in the end, keepers of secrets, and the secrets won. There is one more thing the four of them left behind in the world, quieter than the relics, and far harder to trace, and it is their own blood. Each of the four had a life before the castle, and each of them, in the ordinary way of people, passed something of themselves down into the years that followed, sons and daughters, and after them grandchildren, a thin red thread running out from each founder into the long centuries ahead. They could not have known where those threads would lead. That is its own kind of secret, perhaps the deepest any of us keeps without ever meaning to, the secret of what becomes of our blood after we are gone. And the four founders carried that not knowing into the ground with them, exactly as the rest of us will. Salazar's line we have already followed part of the way, because his was the one that mattered to his plan. The serpent locket went down through his descendants, hand to hand across the generations, and behind the locket the blood went too, the parcel-mouth gift surfacing here and there down the years, like a green light passed from one dark room to the next. His was a narrowing line. Over the centuries it thinned and married outward and thinned again, the old Fenland blood diluting in family after family, until it drew down at last toward a very few, and then toward one. The thing he had sealed beneath the school was waiting for exactly that. It had always been waiting for the single point his whole bloodline would finally narrow to. The heir he had promised would come, and when that heir came, 1,000 years after Salazar went down into his unknown grave, the old horror beneath the castle woke to serve him. He got his wish in the end. He got it in the worst way it could possibly have been granted, but he got it, which is more than any of the other three can say of the things they hoped for. Rowena's line is the saddest of the four, and the shortest, because it ended almost as soon as it began. Helena was her only child. Helena died young and childless, murdered in a foreign forest far from the castle her mother had built, and with her, the blood of the cleverest of the four founders simply stopped. There were no Ravenclaw grandchildren. There was no long descent. The line that should have carried Rowena's brilliance down the ages ran out inside a single generation, in a single death, under foreign trees in the snow. The wisest woman of her age left her mind in a castle and a circlet of silver, and of her actual living blood she left nothing at all that lasted past her own short grief. The only thing remaining of Rowena's line tonight is a ghost who cannot leave, drifting the upper halls of her mother's castle, the last of a bloodline that has been dead for 1,000 years and does not even know how to rest. Helga's line ran the opposite way, and it is the kindest of the four to imagine. She turned no one away in life, and her blood seems to have gone out into the world with the same open hand. Her descendants scattered wide and married freely and sank, generation after generation, into the ordinary blood of the magical world, until you could not pick a child of Helga's line out of a crowded room if you tried. Hers did not narrow to a deadly point, and it did not die under foreign trees. It spread, it thinned pleasantly across 10 centuries of families, until it stopped belonging to anyone in particular, and started, very faintly, to belong to almost everyone. There is something right in that. The most generous of the four left the most widely shared blood, given away so freely down the years, that a great many witches and wizards must carry a small unknowing piece of her, and not one of them will ever find it out. Godric's line is the one the world knows least about, and the not knowing has a quiet weight of its own. His sword surfaces across the centuries, but the blood is much harder to follow. Perhaps it ran on, unremarked, the old lion's courage cropping up in plain, brave people who never once suspected where it came from. Perhaps it failed somewhere in the early centuries, in a war or a plague, or in some childless generation that simply closed the door behind it, so that Godric, like Rowena, left nothing of himself in the living world but his work. Nobody can say. The bravest of the four, the one the later world remembers with the most warmth, may have descendants walking under the sun this very morning with no notion of their own inheritance, or he may have none at all, anywhere, and the truth of it went into the earth with him and stayed there. Set the four lines beside one another in the dark, and a strange sadness rises off them. Salazar's blood narrowed across the centuries to a single deadly point, and it reached that point only to serve the horror he had buried. Rowena's did not outlast even one generation past her own death, ending in the snow with a murdered girl, and leaving behind it nothing but a ghost. The blood of Helga went the other way completely. spread so wide and so generously through 1,000 years of plain families that it cannot now be found in anyone, because it is faintly in us all. And Godric's walked off into the dark of history and was lost, so that no person alive can say whether the bravest of the four has children in the world tonight, or none. 4 people built a castle to outlast the ages, and not one of them managed to hold on to the small, ordinary thing that most people quietly hope for, the knowledge that their own blood would go safely on after them. They gave everything to a thing of stone, because stone lasts longer than people do, and they were right about that. The castle is still standing tonight. The blood that raised it has failed, or scattered past all finding, or run down to a single ruinous heir, and the great grey building has outlived every one of the 4 lives that made it. The chamber beneath the school is the darkest thing the founders hid inside the castle, but it would be a mistake to imagine it was the only thing they hid there. The 4 of them built concealment into the place the way other builders set in windows and doors. Secrecy was in their hands from the very start. They had each spent their early lives hiding what they were, every one of them, and when the 4 came together to raise a castle, the long habit of hiding came with them and went straight down into the stone. The castle is honeycombed with things that were never meant to be found, passages that open only to the right touch or the right quiet word, and stay flat, invisible stone to everyone else. Staircases that lead one place on a Tuesday and somewhere else entirely by the end of the week. Rooms folded in behind other rooms, and behind those, older rooms still, sealed and forgotten so long ago that not even the portraits remember what they once held. 1,000 years of headmasters have lived in that castle, and studied it, and loved it, and not one of them could ever say in honesty that they knew the whole of it. The building keeps its own council. It always has. There is one room in particular that has passed into legend among the people who live there, a room that is not always present at all. It appears only when someone has real need of it, and it becomes only the thing that person needs, and then it folds itself back out of the world, as though it had never been there to begin with. No one is certain the founders made it. No one is certain they did not. It carries the feel of their work, the same deep cleverness that moves the great staircases and folds the impossible halls in on themselves. And whoever set it into the heart of the castle built a space whose entire nature is to stay hidden until the moment of need, and then to leave no trace. If one of the 4 left that behind them, it was Rowena, almost certainly, because a vanishing room that knows what you need is exactly the kind of elegant, impossible thing her mind loved best. But no one knows, and the room is not telling. Think for a moment of the doors in that castle that have never once been opened. In a building so old and so large, so riddled through with the concealments of 4 secretive people, there must be spaces no living soul has stood inside for centuries. Sealed rooms waiting behind sealed rooms. Stairwells that climb to walls that used to be doorways. Whole wings the school simply lost somewhere down the years, shut away in some forgotten trouble, and never reopened. The founders' own hidden chambers among them, holding the wreckage of 1,000 years of magic, sitting patient in the black, exactly where they were left. The chamber was found, in the end, only because something inside it wanted finding. The quiet secrets, the ones with no monster in them, and no heir on his way to wake them, were never found at all, and most of them never will be. And so the castle keeps faith with the 4 who made it, in the truest way a building can keep faith with anyone. It keeps their secrets. 1,000 years on, with the founders long since fallen to dust, their blood scattered or failed, and their relics lost or broken or burned, the place they raised together still holds its hidden rooms and its sealed passages, still keeps its one impossible vanishing chamber, folded away somewhere in its heart, still refuses to give up everything it knows. The 4 of them carried their own secrets down into 4 graves that no one has ever found. The castle, which was always the greatest secret keeper of them all, took the rest, and it is keeping them still, tonight, in the dark, while the children sleep in their warm beds above the hidden places, and never once dream of what lies waiting behind the walls. There are things in that castle that died with the founders, and have not been spoken aloud since. There are things they set into the stone on purpose, that will go on keeping long after every one of us is gone too. The building holds them all, patient and silent, the way it has held everything else, for 1,000 quiet years. The strangest secret of all is one the four of them did not so much take to their graves as become. We do not really know them, for all the stories, for all the houses bearing their names, and the children sorted under their colours every autumn for 1,000 years. The four people themselves have very nearly slipped out of the record entirely. What survives of them is mostly legend, worn smooth, and reshaped by 10 centuries of retelling, and underneath the legend, the real men and women have gone almost completely quiet. Think of how little is genuinely known. We have their names, and the broad shape of their natures, the brave one, and the kind one, and the clever one, and the cunning one. But the small true things, the things that make a person real, are simply gone. No one can tell you the sound of Godric's laugh, though every account agrees he laughed often and loud. What Helga liked to cook with her own hands is lost, and so are whatever songs she might have hummed over her warm kitchens, though the kitchens are still there and still warm. Gone, too, is the exact look on Rowena's face when a hard problem finally gave way, and every one of the riddles she was said to love, beyond the worn old story of the door. And Salazar's voice, in the years when it was still gentle, before the fear got into it, sounded like nothing anyone can now recover, though there must have been years when it was gentle indeed. Even the great facts blur at the edges. The accounts disagree about the order of things, about who fell out with whom and why, about how the rift truly went and how Salazar truly left. The duel between Godric and Salazar comes down to us more as a kind of weather than as an event, a storm everyone agrees happened without anyone quite able to say what the lightning looked like. Whole years of the founding are missing. The four of them lived full lives across decades, and what comes down to us would barely fill a single evening. 1,000 years is long enough to lose almost anything, and what it has mostly lost is the four of them, the actual breathing people, leaving behind only the enormous stone fact of what they built, and the four bright simplified shapes their names have hardened into. There is a particular sadness in that, sitting here in the warm dark thinking of them, to build the most famous magical place in the world, to have your name spoken with love by children for 100 generations, and yet to have yourself, your real self, very nearly forgotten. The houses remember the founders, the way a coastline remembers the sea, shaped entirely by something that is no longer really there. Every Gryffindor child carries a piece of an idea of Godric, and the idea is true as far as it goes, but it is not the man, and the man is gone past all recovering. The four of them are present everywhere in that castle, and known nowhere in it. That is perhaps the last and largest of all the secrets they took down into the ground. Not a chamber, or a grudge, or a hidden room, but the whole of who they actually were, kept now by no one, written nowhere, lost so completely that even the loss itself has been forgotten. And so what is left to do with the four of them is the thing we are doing now. We cannot know them, so we imagine them. We take the worn old shapes of their names, and the little that survives, and we fill the rest in gently, in the dark, the way you might imagine the face of a great-great-grandparent you never met, from a single faded picture and a handful of half-remembered stories. It is not knowledge. It is something gentler than knowledge, and it is the only thing the 1,000 years have left us. So that is how we will leave them tonight. The facts are gone past recovering, and what remains is a warm imagined picture, which is all anyone has of them now, the four of them alive and together, in the one stretch of their lives that asked nothing of them and gave them only joy. Let us go back, one last time, before we let them rest, to the years before any of it broke. Not to the rift, not to the secrets, not to the four lonely deaths, but to the beginning, when the four of them were together, and the castle was new, and none of what was coming had come yet, because those years were real too, and they were good, and it seems only fair to leave the four of them, in our minds, not at their ending, but in the time when they were happiest, when the great wrong thing was still far off, and the four of them were simply four friends who had built something wonderful and were watching it come alive. Picture the castle when it was young, the stones still new and pale, not yet worn and darkened by the centuries to come, the enchantments still fresh, the moving staircases just learning their paths, the whole building settling into itself like a living thing taking its first easy breaths. And into this new castle, the children coming, the first of them, frightened and watchful at the doors, and then, slowly, unclenching, as they realized that here, at last, was somewhere they did not have to hide. Imagine the first time a magical child, who had spent their whole short life concealing what they were, walked into a hall full of other children exactly like them, and understood that the hiding was over. That happened, over and over, in those early years, child after child, arriving in fear and finding safety, and the four founders were there to see it, and there is no way that did not fill them with a joy that justified everything they had poured into the place. Picture the four of them teaching, Godric in the open air perhaps, showing the bolder children how to stand their ground, how to meet a threat without flinching, loud and warm and laughing, the kind of teacher children adore and slightly fear. Rowena somewhere high, in a tower full of light, surrounded by the curious ones, setting them puzzles that made their heads ache and their eyes shine, pushing them further than they thought they could go, and delighting when they reached it. Helga down near her warm kitchens, gathering the ones who needed gathering, the homesick and the slow, and the ones nobody else had time for, teaching them patiently that they belonged, feeding them, mending their small hurts, making the enormous castle feel, to a lost child, like a home. And Salazar, in those early days, before the fear took him, down in his green deep rooms, drawing out the clever ambitious ones, teaching them the subtler arts, sharp and quiet, and then at least, not yet cruel. Four teachers, each doing what they did best, and the children moving among all four of them, and learning from all four, and the castle full of the sound of it. Picture the feasts, the great hall lit with floating candles, the long tables crowded, the enchanted ceiling showing whatever sky hung over the highlands that night, and the four founders at the head of it all, together, watching the children eat and laugh and grow loud and warm and safe. In those early years, the four of them would have sat together at those feasts as friends, the brave one and the kind one, and the clever one and the cunning one, arguing happily over this and that, planning the next thing they would build or teach or try, the great quarrel still no more than a hairline crack they could not yet feel. There would have been laughter at that high table. There would have been the easy comfort of people who have done a hard thing together and done it well. The four of them, before it all went wrong, sharing the simple pleasure of watching the thing they made fill up with life. That happened. For years, that was the truth of them. Four friends and a castle full of safe and happy children, and whatever came after, it cannot unmake those years. The rift was real, but so were the feasts. The secrets were real, but so was the joy of the first children realizing they were safe. The four lonely deaths were real, but so were the nights when the four of them sat together at the head of the hall, full of food and firelight, and the deep satisfaction of good work, with no idea yet of how it would end, and no shadow on them at all. Hold the four of them there, if you like, as you drift towards sleep, not at their graves, not in their silences, at the high table, in the candlelight, young and together, and proud of what they had built, watching a hall full of children who would have been lost without them laugh into the warm dark. That is who they were too. That is where they were happy. Let them stay there a while. The four of them are gone, and have been gone for longer than almost anything else in their world has lasted, but the thing they made is still there, and on a quiet night, it is the closest thing to them that remains. The castle is the real survivor of this whole story. It outlived the friendship, and the quarrel, and the four lonely deaths, outlived the relics that were stolen and lost and corrupted, outlived the very age that made it, and it is still standing tonight, full and warm and alive, in the same wild northern country where four people raised it out of bare rock so long ago. If you want to find the founders now, you do not look for graves, because there are none. You look at the castle in the dark, and you listen. Because the founders are in it, in a way that is hard to name but easy to feel. Their magic is still humming in the walls. Godric's protections still run deep in the foundations, holding, as they have held against everything. Rowena's cleverness still moves the staircases and folds the impossible halls. Helga's warmth still rises from the kitchens that have never once gone cold, and Salazar's dark places are still down there too, below the deep, holding their old strength and their old horror both. The castle is not just a building the four of them made. It is the four of them, set into stone. Their four natures worked so completely into the fabric of the place, that to walk its halls is to walk through the gathered minds of four people 1,000 years dead. The school is the nearest thing to a body they have left, and it is a vast and living one, and it breathes. On a night like this one, with the children long asleep in their 4 houses, and the corridors empty and dim, the castle settles into its oldest self. The great hall stands quiet under its enchanted ceiling, the long tables empty, the candles burned low, the painted stars wheeling slowly overhead, as they have wheeled for 1,000 years. The moving staircases drift to a halt and rest, the portraits doze in their frames, the painted figures dreaming whatever paintings dream, and through the silence move the two who remember, the grey lady drifting her endless careful path through the upper halls, the bloody baron somewhere below with his chains and his grief, the two silent witnesses keeping their 1,000-year vigil over a school that has long forgotten who they truly are. Down in the deepest dark, beneath even the dungeons, the chamber sits sealed and the old horror sleeps, waiting, as it has always waited, and over all of it, in the rafters of the quiet hall, the old hat rests on its shelf, holding the gathered minds of all 4 founders, dreaming, perhaps, of the song it will sing when the children wake. There is a peace in the castle at night that the founders themselves never quite found in life. The quarrels are 1,000 years over, the secrets are mostly told, or mostly lost, which in the end comes to a similar quiet. The 4 of them did their work, and made their mistakes, and carried their sorrows, and went down into their unknown graves, and the great stone thing they built simply went on without them, gathering children, keeping them safe, settling each night into this deep and ancient calm. Whatever the founders failed to resolve between themselves, the castle resolved it the only way such things are ever resolved, by lasting, by enduring, by holding all 4 of them together in its walls, long after the 4 of them could no longer hold together themselves. The lion and the badger, and the eagle and the serpent, are all here, all night, every night, 4 parts of one quiet building, 4 founders made one at last in the stone they raised. And the children sleep, that is the heart of it. In the end, the thing all the rest was for, a castle full of sleeping children, safe behind walls 4 people built, so that children exactly like them would never again have to be afraid. They sleep in the towers and the dungeons and the warm rooms near the kitchens, 1,000 years of them, generation after generation, each one kept safe through the night by magic, older than anything they will ever learn, laid into the stone by hands that turned to dust 10 centuries before they were born. The founders are not watching them, not exactly. The founders are gone, but the founders are the walls, and the walls are watching, and the children sleep soundly inside the gathered care of 4 people they will never know, who quarreled and failed and died badly and yet, between them, made the safest place in their whole world, and made it so well that it is keeping children safe in the dark to this very night. Here is a soft thing to wonder about, lying here in the dark, half gone already towards sleep. If you had walked through those great doors yourself, 11 years old and far from home, and climbed onto that worn wooden stool, and felt the old hat drop down over your eyes, which of the 4 would have claimed you? Which founder would the hat have found in you? It is a gentle question, and there is no wrong answer to it, and you do not need to decide tonight. But it is worth holding for a moment, because the 4 founders are not only ancient figures in an old story, they are 4 ways of being a person, 4 kinds of strength, and every one of us carries something of each of them. There is some of Godric in anyone who has ever stood up for someone weaker when it would have been easier to look away. There is some of Helga in anyone who has ever stayed, patiently, with a person who needed them, or refused to give up on someone everyone else had written off. There is some of Rowena in anyone who has ever stayed awake too late chasing an idea, who needs to understand, who cannot leave a question alone. And there is some of Salazar in anyone who has ever wanted, badly, to become more than they were, who has felt the hunger to be great and been willing to be clever about reaching it. Most of us are some mixture of the 4, leaning one way more than the others, and the hat, when it chooses, is not saying that the one quality is all you are, it is only naming the one that runs deepest. Perhaps you would have been a Gryffindor, all heart and nerve, the first to act when something needed doing. Perhaps a Hufflepuff, steady and loyal and kind, the one others lean on without quite noticing how much. Perhaps a Ravenclaw, quick and curious, happiest with a hard problem and a quiet room. Or perhaps a Slytherin, ambitious and sharp, with a clear eye for what you want and the will to go and get it. None of them is better than the others. The founders quarreled their friendship to death over exactly that question: which of the four kinds of person matters most? And the answer, 1,000 years on, is that the world needs all four and is poorer missing any of them. So which are you? Let it drift through your mind as you settle deeper into the pillow. Not as a test, just as a small warm thing to hold. The thought that if you had been one of those frightened children at the doors 1,000 years ago, the old hat would have looked into you and found something worth naming, and one of the four founders would have claimed you for their own, and you would have had a house and a colour and a place to belong, in the safest castle in the world, kept warm through every night by four people who built it for exactly that. There would have been a place for you there. There has always been a place there for every kind of child. That was the whole point of it. The thing the four of them agreed on before they agreed on nothing else. Whoever you are, whatever the hat would have found, you would have belonged. You will not remember most of this in the morning, and that is all right. That is rather the point of it. The names will blur and the details will soften, and by the time the light comes, you will keep only a vague, warm sense of a castle in the hills, and four people who built it, and something about secrets and sleep. The story will let go of you the way the day lets go of you, slipping off into the dark, and you will not be able to hold it, and you are not meant to. The founders will keep. They have kept for 1,000 years, and they will keep through the morning and into tomorrow night, and the story will still be here whenever you come back to it. There is no need to hold on. There is nothing here you have to carry. Everything important about the four of them is written into a castle that is not going anywhere, kept by a hat that sings every autumn, guarded by two silent ghosts who will not leave, sealed into stone that has outlasted everything. You can let all of it go, every name and every secret, and none of it will be lost, because the keeping of it was never your job. It was theirs, and the castle's, and 1,000 years have proven that the keeping holds. So let it go. Let the four of them slip back into the dark they came out of at the start of the night. Let Godric return to his unmarked grave and his unspoken grief, at peace now, the loss 1,000 years behind him. Let Helga rest, her secrets kept, her kindness vindicated by every loyal child who ever found a home in her house. Let Rowena go, and let her, in the going, somehow finally know what she never knew in life, that her daughter is here, that the diadem is destroyed, that the long not knowing is over. And let Salazar go too, the frightened child beneath the dark wizard, his fear and his malice spent at last, his 1,000-year weapon stilled. Nothing left of him now but the quality the world still needs and is still learning to hold well. Let all four of them rest. The night is nearly over. You have kept them company long enough, and they have kept you company, and now it is time to let the whole thing dissolve into sleep. Before I let you go all the way down into sleep, let me say thank you for spending these hours here with me. It is a strange and lovely thing, all of us out here in the dark together, a castle full of stories between us, and I am grateful you chose to pass part of your night this way. If you have drifted most of the way to sleep already, that is exactly as it should be, and you do not need to stay awake for the rest. But if you are still here, still listening, leave a comment before you go, and tell me how many nights in a row you have fallen asleep with us now. And if tonight was your first, just write night 1, so I know you found your way here. Tell me where in the world you are listening from too, if you like. And if these long quiet histories are the thing that carries you off to sleep, follow along, so the next one finds you when you need it. That is the last I will ask of you tonight. Now you can let go completely, and let me carry you the rest of the way down. Let the castle come back, one final time, in the dark behind your eyes. The great hall, late, with everyone asleep. The 4 long tables standing empty and quiet. High above them the enchanted ceiling, showing the night sky over the highlands. A deep and endless field of stars wheeling slowly in the dark. The same stars that have turned over this hall for 1,000 years. The candles float in the still air, burned low now, their small flames steady and warm and golden, throwing soft light up the ancient stone walls. There is no sound but the faint settling of the old building, the quiet breath of a place at rest. It is warm in here. It is safe. Nothing is going to disturb the peace of this hall tonight. Let yourself rest in that warmth, the way the sleeping children rest in it, scattered through the castle in their 4 houses, deep in their own untroubled sleep. Up in the high towers, the brave ones and the clever ones sleep soundly, the wind moving soft around the stone outside, the fires banked low in the grates. Down in the warm rooms near the kitchens, the loyal and the kind sleep deepest of all, wrapped in the cozy burrow warmth that Helga built for them 1,000 years ago. Down in the green deep rooms below the loch, the ambitious ones sleep too, the dark water lapping gentle against the windows, the underwater light long since faded into night, all of them safe, all of them warm, all of them held through the dark by walls that have never once failed to keep them. The staircases have stopped their wandering and stand still and silent in the dark. The portraits have gone to sleep in their frames, their painted figures dozing, the whole gallery of the castle's long memory quiet for the night. Somewhere in the upper halls, the grey lady drifts her slow and silent path, keeping her 1,000-year watch, and far below the Baron rests in whatever rest a ghost can find, his chains gone quiet. Even the deep-sealed chamber is still, the old horror sleeping its long sleep, harming no one tonight. And in the rafters of the quiet hall the old hat rests on its shelf, the gathered minds of the four founders folded up and dreaming, at peace, the four of them together, in the one place they have always managed to be together, waiting without hurry for the morning that is still hours away. There is nowhere you need to be, there is nothing you need to do. The day you carried in with you is over now, and you can set it down here, in the warm dark of this hall, and leave it. Whatever it held, the worries and the small unfinished things, the noise of it, you can let all of it go for the night. It will keep until morning, the way the founder's story will keep, the way everything keeps while you sleep. None of it needs you right now. Right now there is only the warmth, and the soft gold of the candlelight, and the slow turning of the painted stars, and your own breath, going gently in and gently out, slower now, deeper now, carrying you down. Let your breathing settle into the quiet of the hall, in and out. There is no rush to any of it. With each breath out, let yourself sink a little deeper into the warmth, a little further from the day, a little closer to sleep. The candles burn low and steady. 1,000 years of children have slept in this castle, and every one of them was kept safe through the night, and tonight you are among them, wherever you truly are, in your own bed, in your own corner of the world. The same care reaches you, the same warmth. Four people you will never meet built a place where the frightened could finally rest, and the rest they built has outlasted them by 10 centuries, and reaches all the way to you, here, now, on the edge of your own sleep. You are welcome here. There has always been room. Whoever you are, whatever the hat would have found in you, there is a place for you in the warm dark of this hall, and you can stay as long as you like, and you can sleep. Let the names go now, all of them. Godric, Helga, Rowena, Salazar. Let them dissolve, soft as snow on the loch, sinking away into the dark where they have rested for 1,000 years. You do not need to hold them. Let the castle go too, the hall and the candles and the stars and the 4 quiet tables. Let it all grow dim and soft and far away. Let my voice grow distant. There is nothing left to listen for. The story is told. The 4 of them are at rest. The children are asleep. The castle keeps its long, quiet watch, as it always has, as it always will, and asks nothing of you but that you rest. So rest now. Let the warmth take you down. Let the slow stars turn without you. Let the candles burn low and go soft and golden and dim. Let your breath carry you the last little way, in and out, down and down, into the deep warm quiet where the sleeping children are, where the old castle holds you safe, where there is nothing to fear and nothing to carry and nothing to do but sleep. You are safe, you are warm, you are exactly where you are meant to be. Rest well, sleep now, and let the long night carry you gently all the way to morning.